It all started with the fact that the main character, when he came to his senses, found himself in the novel about the unusual world toist and the monster in the body of a tiger. Some time later, two men discovered a dog that had been killed by someone. One man noticed that someone killed this dog without a single bark and left from here without leaving a trace, without even falling into a trap. And then the same man noticed that it was clearly not an ordinary animal. Suddenly two other men ran up to those two men and said that the noose and trap were also in place. The men said that the traps were definitely set correctly, which means the animal must have been injured, but there is not a single trace. Turning to their boss, the very first man said that this was the first time he had encountered such a thing, and they had better leave here as soon as possible. Then their boss exclaimed that everyone should shut up, because they were preventing him from thinking. The man began to think that if his instincts did not deceive him, then they were in a trap, and if they moved now, this beast could attack them. But they could not remain idle. After thinking a little, the man said that they would leave from here and ordered that the others leave traps, which they would pick up tomorrow, and also that they stick together until they reach the valley. The boss wanted to add that the guys should not act rashly, but before he could finish speaking, a man suddenly fell to the ground. Someone's huge red paw pinned the man to the ground, and the claws left deep wounds on his chest. As it turned out, it was a huge tiger, which, a little weather, threw the man to the side with force. The men did not expect this beast to appear at all. Their leader could not load his crossbow, as his hands were shaking violently from fear. Suddenly, with its mouth open, the tiger rushed straight at the man, and then the beast began to swing its paws with sharp claws. A man with a severed arm, but still alive, said that they disturbed someone who should not have been touched. But still, the tiger was not going to leave anyone alive and attack the last survivor. The next day, in some village, someone asked about what they say is that today is that day. A man and a woman were sitting at the table and having dinner. One of them asked again. The other answered that today was the day of offering for the owner of the mountain. The man, taking a bite of food, replied that it was so, and it would be tonight. The woman asked who it would be this time, to which the man asked if she knew the local nobleman, and then said that it would be one of his slaves. And then he added that this slave seems to be still small, but her hair is white and her eyes are blue, just like a ghost. Night fell. The nobleman stood on the street, waiting for something, when suddenly someone called out to him. As it turned out, this was an old woman, and next to her stood a little girl covered with clothes. The gentleman answered the old woman that she was doing well for bringing the girl, and now she could go, and then added, already turning to the girl, that she should follow him. The girl, clutching the clothes that covered her in her hands, did not move from her place. Then the man shouted at her, and said that he told her to follow him, and only then did the girl come to her senses. The nobleman led the girl to the palanquin, where several men were already standing, who greeted the nobleman. When the girl sat down in the palanquin, the men picked it up and carried it somewhere, and the nobleman stood and watched, seeing them off. Meanwhile, the girl's hands were shaking very badly. The men carried this palanquin somewhere further into the mountains. Having left him at some point, I realized that they instantly, as if afraid of something, ran back. For some time nothing happened. The palanquin just stood on the ground. Then the girl decided to get out of it. When she got out of it, the girl immediately ran in some direction. Having reached the cave, the girl stopped, and exclaimed about what a big cave it was. But then, remembering something, she immediately fell silent and covered her mouth with her hand. The girl thought to herself that she would soon meet the master of the mountain, and therefore she should behave with dignity so that he would not get angry. She thought that she was the one who would become the bride of the lord of the mountain. Making her way deeper into the cave, the girl was shaking with fear and thinking about how dark it was here. Suddenly someone asked her who she was, which made the girl freeze with tears in her eyes. Trying to walk further, the girl's legs gave way and she fell to the ground, and her cape flew off. Suddenly, someone asked the girl even louder about who she was, while the girl was shaking with fear. Stammering, the girl wanted to answer, but could not say it properly. But after a little while and gathering her courage, she clearly answered that she was the one who would henceforth honor him as her husband, and said that her name was Chelsea. This time the tiger did not answer. Blushing a little, the girl covered her mouth with her hand, thinking that she probably said too much. Suddenly, a huge tiger came out from the depths of the cave. Standing up sharply, the girl screamed that she was told that the first time always hurts, but they told her to endure it if she wanted to become a bride. And then, placing her hand on her chest, she said that she completely belonged to him, her husband. Then the tiger shouted for Chelsea to get out of here, and the girl's hair and dress began to develop from the scream. The tiger said that he was not interested in all the nonsense that the girl had just said, causing the girl to freeze with a blank expression on her face. And suddenly she burst into tears loudly. The beast asked loudly why she suddenly started crying, but the girl was too busy sobbing to answer. The tiger tried again to tell the girl to get out, but she immediately burst into tears more than ever. This caused the animal to fall to the ground, covering its head with its paw and thinking about how much it hated crying. Then, more calmly, the tiger again tried to ask what happened and why she was crying, but the girl still sobbed loudly and did not answer. Suddenly she, having calmed down a little, answered intermittently that she was his fiancée, and he was throwing her out. Wiping away the girl's tears with his claw, the tiger sighed and replied that since it was dark outside, he would allow her to spend the night here for one night. Then the girl burst into tears again and burst into screams, which jarred the beast. Snuggling up to the tiger's paw, Chelsea looked up at the beast with a smile on her face, leaving snot on its fur. The next morning, the girl lay on the tiger's fur and snorted quietly. Meanwhile, the beast was no longer sleeping, and was thinking about how long this girl had been sleeping. And then, remembering the appearance of this girl, white hair, blue eyes, he noted that there were very few people in the world with such an appearance, and noticed that she had leukemia. The tiger thought that the girl had been cursed by unknown creatures, and she was also the power of one of them, and now this little child would become a terrible creature, over which everyone would shake with fear. And then he also thought that the blood of these white-blooded animals is an elixir that has no equal, and he added that now everyone will come for her, and that she is more dangerous than he thought, which means he cannot leave her. Suddenly the girl woke up. Still half asleep, she stroked the tiger, and asked him if he had woken up. Suddenly blushing a little and perking up, Chelsea said that they spent the night together, which means she is now officially his fiancée. Suddenly the tiger suddenly stood up, causing the girl to fall to the ground, and said that since the sun had already risen, she should go back to her home. The girl replied that she could not, because she was told that if she did not become his bride, she would be punished. With surprise, the tiger asked the girl who would punish her and who dared to do it, to which the girl replied that it was a nobleman and his son. The beast, hearing this, thought that those bandits were sent by the same people, and it turns out that this little girl is their sacrifice for him. Pleadingly, Chelsea asked the tiger not to leave her, and said that she does laundry very well and eats absolutely everything and that she generally copes well with everything, and therefore let him not leave her. The beast thought that if he sent the girl back to the village, she would immediately be kicked out and die. Not wanting this to happen, the tiger thought about what to do. Having come up with an idea, he thought about sending her to another village, and if he also gave her some useful herbs, then perhaps she would also survive. The tiger led Chelsea to the exit of the cave, holding some things in his teeth. Opening his mouth, he threw some roots and a piece of cloth onto the ground. Looking at these things, the girl immediately asked what they were. The beast replied that he gives her ginseng, and she takes it and goes, without returning to her own, to another village. The girl tries to object, saying that she is his fiancée. Frightened, the tiger tells the girl to stop talking like that, because how can he be her husband, and then adds that she should not say too much and do as he ordered. And then he collects ginseng and a blanket with his tail, and says that if she sells this root, she will be able to buy a small house, and even stay. The tiger then gives these things into Chelsea's hands, to which she says that she doesn't need anything and just needs him. But then the beast turns around threateningly, and tells the girl to stop making him angry, and then he goes into the cave, thinking that he is the one who is the master of the mountain, and therefore is doomed to be alone forever. But then the girl calls out to the beast, to which he tells her to get out of here. But Chelsea says she can't go down, and doesn't know where the other village is. The beast sighs, thinking that he can help, because in principle he is not busy, and then he presses his head to the ground and tells the girl to sit on him. Chelsea resolutely ties the blanket containing the ginseng to her chest, and then she begins to climb up the tiger's face, which makes him a little perplexed and asks if she can be easier, but he himself thinks that she could climb up from the side. Having climbed onto the tiger's head, the girl turns her head, and suddenly her eyes widen. As it turned out, she saw the incredibly beautiful mountains and forest from above. Slapping the tiger on the head, Chelsea says that she must be the first person to sit on a ferocious tiger's neck like that, causing it to get angry. And then she closes her eyes joyfully, pointing her finger forward, and shouts for the beast to rush as quickly as possible, calling him her hubby. And then the tiger pushed off and jumped forward, telling the girl to stop calling him hubby. Having gone a little lower, the tiger said that there was already a village over there. Chelsea, meanwhile, pulled the tiger's ears, and he asked her to stop doing this, because it hurt him. The girl immediately let go of his ears and apologized, and then she sharply hugged the beast by the neck. In response, the tiger told her not to stick to him, and to go down faster. In response, the girl immediately agreed, let go of the tiger and slid down his paw. Going back to the cave, the tiger said out loud that, although he was a little interested, he had already become tired of her, and therefore they should never see each other again. Then Chelsea quickly grabbed the beast's tail and asked him where he was going. In response, the tiger asked if the girl really didn't know what a sin it was to hold animals by their tails. The girl replied that she knew about this, but he was leaving his bride, to which the beast replied that she was not his bride at all. Continuing to pull the tiger by the tail, Chelsea reminded that they spent the night together, and therefore she is his bride. In response, the tiger said that the girl was completely crazy, and asked how a tiger and a person could get married and whether she understood what it meant to spend the night. Otherwise, all sorts of things are chattering here. The girl shouted that no matter what, she married him, so he should be responsible for her. Wondering where the little girl got such strength, the tiger said that he even got her ginseng, which she could sell and live without denying herself anything. Sharply throwing the bag of ginseng to the ground, Chelsea shouted that she didn't want it that way and that if the tiger wasn't around, then she didn't need this useless herb. The beast asked himself whether the girl had any idea how expensive this useless grass was, and then thought that it wouldn't end like this, which means that although he didn't want to do it, he would have to. Worried that his tail would fall off, the tiger suggested that the girl go to the village to sell this ginseng, and then return back, thereby paying the dowry. The girl's mind caught hold of the word dowry, and her eyes sparkled, and she herself blushed. Joyfully picking up the ginseng wrapped in cloth from the ground, she told the animal not to go anywhere, because she would return quickly. The tiger agreed with this and began to warn the girl. He told her not to hurry too much, but the girl ran as fast as she could along the road. Then he added that she should be careful, and Chelsea immediately fell to the ground. But a second later she got up and moved on, disappearing into the distance. Near one of the houses in the village, near a fire on which there was a kettle, an old man sat and fanned the fire with a fan. Chelsea approached him and told him that she had come to sell him something. When the old man looked at the girl, he immediately caught the gaze of blue eyes. And then the old man jumped away from the girl screaming. But as he moved away and his scream became quieter, the man said to himself that he thought it was a ghost, and then, clearing his throat, asked what the girl brought him. The girl took the ginseng out of the cloth and gave it to the old man, and he began to look at it closely. Realizing that it was ginseng, the old man loudly asked Chelsea where she found it, to which the girl replied that her husband gave it to her, and the man repeated the answer, and the girl replied that she had to sell it to pay for the dowry. Suddenly something awakened in the old man, and he thought that these roots looked about 300 years old, and this child clearly did not know their value and looked very stupid, which means he could easily deceive her and get this root for a couple of coins. But suddenly he came to his senses and sighed, thinking how lowly he had thought about deceiving the child. And then the old man said that he could not buy such an expensive product, and advised her to go to the house of a local rich man, and told her to be sure to say that he said that this was real ginseng. In response, Chelsea bowed low to the old man, thanking his. Meanwhile, eating meat in his cave, the tiger thought aloud that nothing could compare with the emotions when he alone rips meat from a bone. The beast said that the world is always like this, namely, that the blame lies with the one who was deceived, because you cannot be stupid, because this is already unforgivable for this world, and in general, if you think like that, then he is the one who suffered, because he lived for himself good, and then some child came and almost took away his quiet life. But then he thought, what would happen if a girl suddenly came here with a dowry and might move? But after a second he dismissed this thought and said that he is the master of the mountain, and therefore how can he move because of some girl? Suddenly, a woman's voice asked him if he was worried, to which the beast asked again that he was worried about some girl. But then the voice replied that nothing had been said about the girl. Then, feeling a little awkward, The tiger replied that he was worried about his ginseng. In response, the voice said that it was understandable that he was worried about him, because these disgusting people would definitely use dirty methods to get ginseng. The voice continued and said that perhaps they would beat this girl and take him away, or maybe, so that she would not spread rumors, I would kill her altogether. From these words the tiger became a little agitated. Meanwhile, in the village, a nobleman was sitting and eating meat and rice while someone was actively calling him. Hitting the table, the man shouted that he had warned him not to be disturbed while he was eating, and then added that because of them he had lost all his appetite, and then asked what happened there. The servant replied that the uncle, the doctor, had sent someone to sell ginseng. The nobleman went out to look at this ginseng, and when he saw it, he thought that it was the first time he had seen a root of such size, and wondered how this value had ended up in the hands of a child. But then he noticed that the girl was white-haired and blue-eyed, and suspicions crept into his head. Then, grabbing himself and his chin, the man asked if she was a slave of one house, naming the name of the master for whom the girl served in the previous village. Chelsea asked how the man guessed. Then, pointing his finger at the girl, the man, shouting, asked why the offering to the Lord of the Mountain was still alive, and stated that she had definitely escaped. And then he said that she definitely stole this ginseng, to which the girl replied that her husband gave her this ginseng so that she could sell it. But the man did not believe her and, without ceasing to scream, said that the girl was not yet old enough to get married, which means she was definitely lying, and declared that she was a thief and a runaway, and ordered the servants to take the ginseng from her and drive her away. The servants obeyed their master, and one of them extended his hand to the girl, telling her to give him her ginseng, while the man, holding the girl by the hand, tried to take the root. Chelsea screamed that she couldn't take it, because her husband had given it to her. The servant noted that despite his best efforts, the girl was not moving and wondered how this little girl could be so strong. Losing his temper, the man forcefully pushed the girl, and she fell to the ground. Noticing this, the nobleman said that he wanted to let the girl go if she gave the ginseng in an amicable way. But now it wouldn't work, and ordered straw to be brought. Still clutching the root in her arms, Chelsea, bursting into tears, tried to justify herself while a servant approached her with a stick in his hand. The man, with a sharp movement of his hand, raised the stick above his head, intending to hit the girl, and said that now they would see how her pain receptors work. Evening had already come, and Chelsea, barefoot, walked on the ground, never ceasing to cry and say how much she was in pain and what should she do, because her ginseng had been taken away from her. But returning to the place where she parted with the tiger, she found no one there. The girl froze and called her husband, and then she started running around, calling out to her husband and saying that Chelsea had already returned. Suddenly she stopped in front of the forest, from where voices were heard saying how delicious it smells like girls. Some black monsters crawled out from behind the trees, saying how sad it was that the girl was alone, and how poor she was. They got closer and closer to her, and asked that she was probably sad and in pain, and then they told her to come to them, because they would be with her, and would never leave her. Chelsea gave in to persuasion and slowly approached the monsters. Suddenly one of them opened his mouth and shouted that he would rip the meat off the girl. But suddenly something was cut by this monster. As it turned out, it was a tiger who said that how dare an empty soul like this covet what belongs to him. Standing behind Chelsea, the beast raised its head and opened its mouth, in which some kind of blue energy was collected. The girl turned to the tiger, and then he asked who dared to do this to her, but the girl said nothing, but only grabbed the fur of the beast. And a little later she burst into tears again, screaming loudly. Meanwhile, in the village, the nobleman threw a bag of coins on the floor in front of the servant, and said that it worked well, and wanted to ask something. But the servant, as if guessing the owner's thoughts, said, taking the bag in his hands so that the owner would not worry, because he had already put the guys on guard, which means that if something suddenly comes, he will not be able to come in. Praising the servant again, the man sent him away and stared at the ginseng, thinking about how beautiful it was. Coming out of the nobleman's chambers, the man thought that with this money he could rest for several months, and then he thought why not go to the girl's restaurant. Suddenly he saw that the gate began to crack, and some kind of light was visible from these cracks. Suddenly the gate broke completely and light filled the entire yard. At that same second, other servants gathered in the courtyard, asking who dared to break into their master's house. Suddenly they were surprised to notice that it was their recent guest. The servant who had previously beaten the girl asked how she dared to come back here, and then said that apparently she had received few blows then and now she wanted to die. Suddenly a tiger came out from behind her, and said that they would see who would die today. The nobleman, hearing a noise in the courtyard, came out of his chambers and, shouting, asked who was making noise under his house at night. But suddenly a man flew towards him and broke the doors. The tiger, entering further into the yard, asked, calling them bastards, whether they dared to touch the girl. He asked if they gathered together and beat the little girl, and that's all they could do, while all the men were shaking with fear. Declaring that these people were worse than trash, the tiger opened its mouth and began to collect holy energy there. Having said that he would nobly return to them everything that they had done to the girl, the beast raised its paw, releasing its claws. But then Chelsea shouted for him to wait, and stretched out her little hand to him. Suddenly the girl stood in front of one of the men, protecting him, causing the tiger's paw to stop halfway. Chelsea said she didn't want the tiger to kill anyone and suggested they take the ginseng and go home. Hearing this, the beast stopped and scratched its head, looking away. Then he called one of the servants, which made him very scared, and then the beast with the threatening muzzle ordered him to bring ginseng. But then a nobleman showed up with ginseng on a tray. Quickly bowing before the tiger, the man said that he protected the root and served behind it so that nothing would happen, waiting for the master of the mountain to come. In response to this, the beast barked that the man would not lie to him. Continuing to bow, the nobleman closed his eyes and prayed that the tiger would not kill him. Suddenly the beast said that, if it were his will, he would devour the sturdy face from him, but he won't do it, and the girl is worth thanking for this. These words greatly surprised the man that he opened his eyes wide. And then the tiger said that the man should give him all his wealth in return, and if he left even one grain of rice for himself, it would end badly for him. Shaking with fear, the nobleman ordered that all his wealth be delivered to the mountain as quickly as possible. Hearing this, the tiger and Chelsea disappeared, leaving behind a blue haze. After this, the man turned gray with fear, thinking that the husband the girl was talking about turned out to be Spencer, the owner of the mountain, which means she is the bride of the keeper of the mountain. Waking up the next day in his cave, Spencer wondered how everything had turned out this way. He looked at the riches that were delivered to his cave, and mentally mourned his calm, cozy nest, his calm, routine life. Chelsea, meanwhile, said she found wild raspberries, and then she tried to put the berries into the tiger's mouth while he was still in prostration. Having put in the berries, the girl with a smile on her face asked if it was true that these berries were delicious. Thinking that he had brought her back, but nothing had changed, the beast finally stood up. In response, Chelsea asked where it was going. Heading towards the exit of the cave, Spencer replied that he was going to drink water, to which the girl replied that she wanted it too, and ran after him. A tiger and a girl walked together through the forest to a pond. Then Chelsea, tugging at the tiger's fur, says that she is tired and asks how long they have to go, to which the beast replies that they have come, and a pond opens before their eyes, over which fireflies fly. Suddenly a catfish flies out of the reservoir, and he says, turning to the owner of the mountain, that they have not seen each other for a long time. In response, Spencer says that he really does, and asks how he is doing, to which the catfish replies that as soon as the tiger came, his life got better, and Chelsea, meanwhile, laughs quietly, thinking about what this fish is saying. Why should she so funny? Spencer tells the catfish to give him what he was leaving with him, to which the fish, mockingly, asks if he wants to give it to his bride. In response, the tiger only irritably replies that he should stop talking. Here the catfish takes out a small oblong box from its mouth, and after he solemnly presents it, the beast tells the girl to try to open this box. Chelsea gets to open the box, from which light immediately bursts out. Taking out what was in the box, the girl exclaims, talking about what a beautiful hairpin this is. Spencer explains that this hairpin was carved from a peach tree that is over 1,000 years old, and this hairpin has the ability to ward off evil spirits, and therefore the girl should always keep it with her. A little taken aback, Chelsea asks if he really wants to give this hairpin to her, to which the tiger sarcastically asks if he should put it on himself. Suddenly tears appear in the girl's eyes. In a panic, the beast asks what happened to her again. Chelsea says this is the first gift she's ever been given for no reason. Thinking that this is her first gift, the girl presses it to her chest and mentally vows to take care of it. The next morning, the girl again sleeps on the tiger's fur, not letting go of her new hairpin. Spencer turns to the girl, who is muttering something in her sleep, and then he stands up abruptly. Wondering when Chelsea managed to lie down next to him, the girl gasped and fell to the ground. Not yet fully awake, Chelsea asks her husband if he's awake yet while her mouth is drooling. The tiger tells the girl to get ready because they are going on a long journey. In response, the girl asks where they are going, to which the beast replies that even if he tells her, she still doesn't know, and then tells her to take so many valuables, as much as he can. Chelsea walks over to the chests of floor and jewelry and begins to pick them up, putting them in a bag. Suddenly a female voice asks the tiger if it is necessary for him to do this, to which he mentally replies that he will not get involved in her fate. In response, the voice asks if he doesn't think that becoming a bride was her destiny, or is he just still afraid to create connections with other people. The beast replies that everything is completely different and that a person must have a human destiny, and it is very different from him, an animal, and besides, it is enough for him that this voice bothers him. The voice notes that the tiger used to hate the word fate, but now he began to use this word often. In response to Spencer, he says that she remained as grumpy as she was, despite the passing years. In response, the voice mockingly says that they say that the older you get, the wiser you become. But apparently this is all nonsense, because age can also make you stupid, to which the tiger, starting to get angry, asks her again what she just said. In response, the voice innocently says she wasn't talking about him specifically and asks why he was so angry. Then Chelsea speaks up and says that she has finished getting ready, and stands in front of the beast with a bag in her hands. Some time later, a woman and a black tiger appear in the cave. Entering the cave, the tiger notices that there is no one here and asks the woman if this is not where they need to be. The woman replies that it is, this is where they need to be, in response to which the tiger asks why Spencer is not here then. The woman replies that perhaps it is because he is afraid of him, in response to which the black beast asks if she really thinks so. The woman says if it's not Tao, then why isn't Spencer in his own house? Hearing this, the tiger bursts into malicious laughter and says that it is so, that he ran away, to the one who is afraid of him. In response, the woman sighs and asks if he wants to return. Lying down on a stone, the beast replies that it doesn't want to, and tells them to stay here, because sooner or later Spencer will come back. And then he bursts into malicious laughter again, saying that he wants to look at that face when Spencer sees him. In response, the woman sighs again and says that the tiger should not laugh like that. Meanwhile, an old man and a little boy are walking along the road with a bag on their backs. Suddenly, having climbed the slope, they notice a tiger in front of them. The boy exclaims in fear, and the old man, standing in front of him and covering him with his hand, tells him to move away from here. Spencer and the man make eye contact, but then the old man notices that a little girl is sitting on the tiger's head. The boy and the man look at this girl in surprise. Noticing these people, Chelsea greets them with a smile on her face and waves her little hand. Blushing, the boy also greets her and hesitantly waves his hand in response. As the tiger leaves, the boy tells his teacher that there is a girl sitting on the tiger's neck, to which the old man replies that they will watch them. Night has fallen. A deer is running through the forest and chewing grass. Suddenly this deer is attacked by a tiger. He successfully grabs the side of this deer with his teeth, while the other deer, seeing this, runs away in fear. Holding the deer in his mouth, Spencer thinks about why he constantly has to share his prey, but then calms himself down, thinking that they will soon reach the village. Having carried the deer, the beast says that this is dinner, in response to which Chelsea runs up to the tiger, and is surprised at how quickly the beast caught this deer. And then she says that you think that among the tigers, Spencer has the most excellent hunting skills. The slightly stunned tiger replies that it was very easy, and then, scratching his nose, he says that he can get anything if he just tells the girl. Then he tears off the deer's leg and gives it to the girl, telling her to eat it. Chelsea responds by saying that she doesn't eat raw meat. Spencer is surprised by this and asks if she doesn't even know how to start a fire, to which the girl says she doesn't know. Suddenly the old man, whom they had previously met, notices that the tiger and the girl are having a little trouble, and says that they can share fire with them. Chelsea thanks the old man and says that they can share the meat with them in return, to which the man replies that they will be grateful. Spencer is there alone, chewing on the body of a deer. The tiger thinks that the girl just had to bring fire here, and wonders what she has been doing for so long. Looking towards the people, the animal notices that Chelsea is talking to the boy, and notices what a wide smile he has. A deer leg is roasted over a small fire. Chelsea looks at this and drool runs down her face. Scratching his cheek, Spencer asks the girl, looking away, what they discussed for so long. Wiping her drool with her sleeve, Chelsea replies that the boy is the same age as her, which is why they decided to be friends, and said that this boy's name is Ben. Suddenly, the girl's stomach begins to growl loudly, and the tiger remarks out loud that the girl seems to be very hungry. Worried, Chelsea with red cheeks replies that if the beast is also hungry, then she can share with him. Spencer asks what she's talking about since she's really hungry herself because he can hear the whale howling in her belly. In response, the girl replies, a little offendedly, that it's a whale in the tiger's belly. Licking his paw, the tiger says that it seems that hunger has hit the girl hard on the head, and then wonders why she is so ashamed. In response, the girl jumps up and says that everything is wrong. Spencer replies that he is not deaf and that it is just him and her, and then asks if he can really distinguish the sound from his stomach. Out of anger, the girl begins to frown and puff. Suddenly she grabs the deer's leg, and screaming that the tiger is a fool, Chelsea runs away with her leg in her hands, while the animal wonders what is happening to her. While the girl runs deep into the forest, a woman's voice sighs and asks if the tiger really cannot understand the girl's feelings. And then the voice asks if Spencer will follow her, because it's dangerous there. Wondering what he did wrong, the tiger says that the hairpin will protect her. The voice says that maybe the hairpin will protect her from evil spirits, but there are worse creatures in the forest. Or maybe she will get lost altogether. In response, licking her paw, Spencer replies that then this is her fate. Then the voice asks what fate did to her then, too, to which the tiger does not answer. And then he asks why the woman cares so much about her. In response, the voice says that the tiger cannot be honest with itself, to which Spencer replies that she should not say nonsense. Suddenly the old man appears right in front of the tiger, and says that the beast is not a sacred animal, but only a creature that kills people. Rising from the ground, Spencer asks again. The old man says that he is from Mount Conger, and then asks the tiger that he didn't think that he didn't know about the ghost who is always next to him. As it turns out, the ghost, who was previously a man, but was killed by a tiger, does not leave him, but bewitches other people and leads them to the tiger. Meanwhile, Spencer remembers that the warriors from Mount Conger are keenly aware of the theme of ghosts. And then he orders his ghost to come out, and a woman appears next to him. Pointing a sword at the tiger, the old man shouts that he puts the honor of the Conger warrior and promises to cut out the beast's throat. Spencer sighs and, turning to Hannah, says that it was all his fault, and therefore she must figure it out herself. The man asks the beast where he went while the ghost comes closer to him, and then Hannah says that she will be his opponent, and her pendant begins to glow. Next, a sword begins to appear from the pendant. Raising her hand, the ghost took out a sword from her pendant. Seeing this, the old man realized that this was a necklace where you could put absolutely everything, regardless of size. The man was surprised to think that this ghost could control him. After a short silence, he asked if he could ask a question. In response, Hannah said that they say that people who learn martial arts become too self-confident, and that once the old man pulled out the sword, then talking is over. The man frowned and said, since she says so, then so be it. And then, using the dragon art technique, which created several clones of the man, he rushed to attack, thinking that this woman had lost her human essence anyway. And now the blades almost reached the ghost's head. Suddenly, the ghost blocked the blow of a real sword behind her back. The old man was surprised and exclaimed, "How could this be?" Hannah said that since he treats the girls so rudely, then she should repay him with a worthy blow. Then she swung her sword, and the man was thrown back. The hand of the old man holding the sword began to shake, but the ghost did not retreat, and now her sword almost reached the man's face. But the man managed to block this blow, and their swords touched, creating a flash of light. The old man had difficulty holding back this attack while the swords created sparks. Using the art of the dragon again, the man exposed his pendant to the blow, and he himself moved to the side. But the ghost, asking where the old man was running away from her, and without looking, immediately pointed the tip of her sword to the side. And then she struck again, which pushed the enemy back. Ben called out to his teacher in fear. Meanwhile, his teacher stood leaning on his sword while his entire body shook. The man wondered in surprise how it was possible that he was losing to some ghost. Hannah, meanwhile, moved closer to the old man, and he immediately raised his head. The woman again prepared to strike, and the old man thought about whether she was a ghost at all. While Hannah fought the man, Chelsea sat on a rock near a field of wild wheat and ate her meat. Suddenly someone asked if it tasted good to her, causing the girl to shudder, and then she turned with her cheeks stuffed, and looked angrily at the speaker. Spencer told her to go to the fire, since it was cold here, and noted to himself that the girl had an appetite as good as his. Grunting offendedly, Chelsea said nothing and turned away from the tiger. Not wanting to fall for such manipulations, the tiger said that if so, then he would leave from here, and said goodbye, and then added that he was not very pleased, so he would quickly forget about her. The girl did not expect such a reaction at all and turned around in surprise, and then she ran after the tiger. The beast thought that it couldn't be otherwise, because she was just a child. Suddenly Spencer noticed something and his eyes opened wide. Not expecting the tiger to stop, Chelsea gasped and cut herself on his leg. Raising her hand to her bruised nose, she asked why the tiger stopped. Coming forward, he told the girl to be quiet, and then he ordered whoever was hiding here to come out. Chelsea hid behind the tiger in fear. Suddenly someone said that he would not say unnecessary words, and then he ordered to leave the girl and leave, and then said that if he did this, he would spare the tiger. Spencer noted that it looked like they had entered Black Soul territory. He looked at the girl and thought that he expected this to happen, but did not expect it to happen so quickly, and began to think about what to do. And then the tiger suddenly asked what the speaker promised, that he would not touch him if he gave him the girl, and thought that first he needed to survive. The girl, meanwhile, looked at the tiger in surprise. The Black Soul noted with mockery that the beast knew its place, and then replied that he was keeping his promises, and then once again ordered him to leave the girl and disappear. The girl called Spencer hesitantly. Looking at Chelsea, the tiger ordered her to let him go. In a panic, the girl asked why he was doing this. Was it because she was angry? And then said that she would not do this again and asked him not to do this to her. Giving Chelsea a stern look, Spencer said he didn't want to die here with her, and then he said that, of course, he became attached to her, but not so much as to die with her. And then, jerking his foot, the tiger told the girl to accept her fate, and then the beast began to leave. Suddenly a dark shadow appeared behind the girl, who laughed and said that the white-blooded one would soon die. Meanwhile, Jean asked the old man, pointing the sword at his face, if everything was clear to him now, and then she said that she would not ask him to believe her, but she wanted him to know that they did not want to harm this girl. And then she removed the sword from the man's face while he remained silent. Sighing, the old man replied, "What else can he do? Even if he doesn't believe, he must believe." With a smile on her face, the ghost said that it was good that he understood everything, because there was nothing more stupid than not knowing his place. And then she asked what the man was doing here with his student, to which the old man replied that they were spiritually training here. Hearing this, the woman said that here you can find something that you cannot find anywhere else. Standing up with a broken sword in his hands, the man said that she was right, and that is why they came here, believing the rumors. In response, the woman asked what kind of rumors. The old man said that since ancient times many people have been dying in these places. Hearing this, Hannah asked the man to continue his story. The old man said that all the corpses were without limbs, and they cut the skin of their stomachs, as if they wanted to find something there. The woman's thoughts caught on the phrase "wanted to find." Suddenly the ghost and the old man felt something. They looked around and noticed some green smoke rising from behind the trees. Hannah suggested that something must have happened. Waving his sword, the Black Soul repeated the word "white blood" as if he was savoring it. And then he said that for more than 200 years they have been saying about white bloods that there are no more of them left. Smiling, he said that in this world there is no peaceful person more fortunate than him. He extended his hand towards her. The girl looked at him with an empty gaze, and the Black Soul told her to go with him. Throwing Chelsea over his shoulder, the Black Soul went somewhere. The girl, meanwhile, recalled how, when they saw her, all the boys began to shout insults and throw stones at her, and told her to leave their village. She recalled how after she looked back at them, they would run away in fear. She recalled how one day she held out her hands with a broken bowl and asked for food, but instead of helping, they poured slop on the girl. And then they asked her how she dared to come here, and they said that she was bringing bad luck to their village. She recalled how she had to sit outside in winter without warm clothes. But suddenly one day someone approached her. As it turned out, a nobleman approached her. This nobleman took her with him, and he gave her clothes that were not torn. He also gave her a warm blanket. But suddenly the woman who was in the room with her threw a pillow at her and shouted at her to get out and not dare to approach her. So the girl began to work as a servant in this gentleman's house, where she was constantly shouted at. She recalled how one day, when she was unloading a cart, one of the servants said that if she did not finish it in a given time, then she would not see food today. Then the girl thought that she needed to work harder so that she would not get kicked out, and that she needed to be harder because she didn't look like them. Suddenly she heard some girls congratulating one of them on the fact that she had been proposed to, and that she would no longer have a family. Chelsea decided to watch them through the fence, while the girl boasted that her future husband gave her an engagement ring. Suddenly someone called out to the girl and asked what she was doing there, and then she was beaten for being idle. Sitting on the roof at night, Chelsea thought about love, marriage, family, and imagined that that star was her husband, and then she said to herself that she heard what those girls were talking about. She said, looking at the sky, that she didn't quite understand everything, but these were very beautiful words. And then she asked the stars and the moon if she, too, could get married, if she would have the only one who would protect her and scold others for scolding and beating her. She asked if she would have someone who would love her and do everything for her, if she would have only her husband. Thinking about this, Chelsea laughed and waved her legs. Suddenly one day the master said that she should marry Spencer. Hearing this, the girl blushed. While going about her business and thinking about her future marriage, she blushed every time. Chelsea thought about what her husband would be like. She didn't want him to have a cool look. She did not demand some angel for her husband. The girl smiled, thinking that she would also have a family, and that she would no longer be alone, and that her husband would be a tiger. Chelsea learned that her husband would be a tiger from one of the girls. This girl said that it is unknown when he will decide to eat her, his bride. Hearing this, the girl got scared. When she was being prepared to be sent to the mountain, she was no longer happy, but only thought that she was taken into the house as a homeless person, dressed in clean clothes, given a room, just for this moment, which means that in the end she could not become a person, she is just a ghost in human form. Meanwhile, the black soul reached his refuge, and he hit the stone with his sword. Taking a knife in his hands, he said that the girl's blood and body would belong to him, and this would be bliss. As the black soul approached Chelsea, he said that he would not abandon her like the tiger did. Taking her head and preparing to plunge a knife into her, he told her that she should not be sad, but that she should be reborn again. And then the edge of the knife began to approach Chelsea, but she only thought that she did not hate Spencer, because meeting in friendship with him, his warm hugs, what he did for her, what he gave her made her happy. And so the girl prepared to die with a smile on her face. But the knife did not strike, and the crippled black soul fell to the ground. As it turns out, Spencer came out of nowhere and tore his arm off. The black soul screamed furiously, swearing at the tiger. And the tiger, in turn, called Hannah, still holding his hand in his teeth. And suddenly some black smoke appeared behind the girl, and Hannah emerged from it, and asked Chelsea if she was okay. Turning around, the girl asked who this woman was and what was going on here. The woman replied that her name was Hannah and she was a ghost who did not leave Spencer. In response, the girl said that her husband hated her. In response to this, the ghost said that this creature was very strong, and it was probably a strategic move. And then she added that the tiger values the girl very much, which is why she shuddered a little and said that then he said that everything was completely wrong. Hiding behind the invisibility cloak, Hannah urged Chelsea to look at the beast, to look at how he was trying to protect her. And then she added that the enemy was much stronger than Spencer, while the tiger fought fiercely with the black soul. Looking at this battle, at Spencer, the girl began to remember her dreams about whether she would have the one and only. She remembered if she would have someone who would protect her and scold others for scolding her or hitting her. Remembering these questions that she asked the stars and the moon, she burst into tears. Chelsea burst into tears and said that she didn't even know that, and then added that from now on she will listen more. Hannah didn't answer, but just looked at the girl with a smile. And then she, taking off her robe, began to throw it on the girl, saying that it was dangerous here and they needed to leave, in response to which Chelsea tried to object. While Spencer was still fighting fiercely with the black soul, the ghost said that the tiger could not fight at full strength because the girl might get hurt. Accepting this reason for leaving quite reasonable, she disappeared under the robe, finally calling her husband. A second later, Hannah and Chelsea seemed to disappear, and the tiger thought that now he could finally fight at full strength, and then he began to concentrate energy in his mouth, and then the beast shot this energy at the black soul, causing it to fly away and its sword to be knocked out of its hands. Black Soul sensed danger in this action, But before the soul had time to come to its senses, Spencer slammed his head into the ground with his paw, breaking the stone. But suddenly blood got on this muzzle, which gave off red steam, and the tiger sharply jumped away from his opponent. Then the black soul stood up, laughing, and his hair began to fall apart. Suddenly there were rat teeth, and he said that the tiger was not bad, but still remained a pitiful animal. As it turns out, the black soul's real form was a rat, and he said that he would rip out the tiger's limbs and pull out all his limbs. Seeing the real appearance, Spencer thought of it as a rat without hair and blood that had turned into poison, and then called this rat a bloodthirsty creature. Suddenly, drops of blood that had spread on the floor of the cave began to take shape. Seeing this, the tiger was very surprised. The rat said that the beast did not take into account his strength, and suddenly a bunch of small rats began to form from his blood, which rushed forward with a vile squeal. The blood rats rushed en masse towards the tiger, and their leader shouted that the tiger would not escape him alive. Then Spencer struck one of the blood rats, causing it to immediately burst. The blood of this rat fell on the tiger's paw and immediately began to burn, which brought pain to the beast. Seeing this, the rat laughed and exclaimed that it was all useless. The army of blood rats attacked the tiger again, while their leader shouted that such a pathetic creature as Spencer would never be able to stop him. While the rats rushed at the tiger and burst, leaving their burning blood, the rat shouted that the beast could not escape from the rats made from his blood, and that the tiger would die a miserable death, as he was destined to do. After some time, the tiger found himself covered in blood, which is why he began to be paralyzed. While the blood rats were still mercilessly rushing at the tiger's leg, Spencer thought that everything could have been different if he were here now. Suddenly the animal cried out that it was in pain. The rat noticed that the tiger had stumbled, and opened himself up for attack. And then, shouting that he was caught, he kicked Spencer in the face. From this blow the tiger flew back and hit a stone behind him. The rat shouted for the tiger to die slowly and painfully, and then a bunch of bloody rats attacked the beast. Crushed by these rats, Spencer thought only that he still had to endure a little longer. And then he pushed away all these rats, concentrating the energy in his mouth. But still, all these attacks did not pass without a trace, and the beast was already pretty battered, and vapors of this poisonous blood were emanating from it. The rat noted with surprise that he was still boldly going against his attacks, and trying like a dog in water. Afterwards he pulled out his huge claws and said that so be it, he would do him honor and finish him off himself. Calling his opponent a dirty rat, Spencer said that he talks too much and for a long time. Suddenly, Hannah attacked the rat from behind with a sword, and with a sharp movement of the sword she made a deep cut on the enemy's neck, causing blood to flow out like a fountain. The woman told the rat that he was too reckless. Meanwhile, the black soul shook its head in panic, making grunting and gurgling sounds. Spencer said he was taking too long to die, and indignantly told him to die already. Clutching the wound on his neck with his paw, the rat began calling his opponents small creatures, and then said that they dared to touch his body. Thinking that there would be no second chance, the tiger raised his paw in preparation to attack and used the furious fist technique, causing his paw to glow with blue fire. And then the beast rushed at the enemy, who was discouraged by this. And so, when the tiger's paw was almost at the enemy's face, he used the furious fist technique. The rat, a second before the blow tore his head into pieces, shouted that he hated that damn tiger. The lower part of the rat's body, still intact, fell to the ground while the edges of the wound glowed with blue lights. Blue fire slowly but surely burned the body of the scythe, and then this fire, flaring up, engulfed the entire remaining body of the black soul. Meanwhile, it was already dawn outside. Leaving the cave, Spencer sighed with relief and said that he almost died there. And upon leaving the cave, he was surprised to notice that it was already light. Hannah, holding the rat's sword in his eyes, decided to draw the attention of her tiger to what interesting things they could get, and then said that they would be very useful to them in the future. The tiger asked where Chelsea was now, to which the ghost replied that she took her to the old man in the village and told them to go to the village. Then she said that if suddenly the beast dies, then she will also lose her strength, and if this happens, then all these creatures will attack the girl. The tiger, frowning, looked at the ghost and did not answer anything, while she herself smiled innocently. And then Spencer admitted that it was true and wondered what kind of feeling had awakened in him. Hannah then suggested that they go to the girl, to which the tiger only chuckled thoughtfully. Spencer thought that as soon as he left the mountain, something like this immediately happened, and this would happen again. And with such power, he was not sure that he could protect the girl. But by killing this monster, he received an eye with the ability Reincarnation, and wondered if this was an accident. Looking at his eyes, he thought that if he were reincarnated as a human, he would be able to use the sword he received and be able to fight stronger opponents. He also noticed that he would finally be able to use the technique that he had been unable to master for so long, flamed blue flower. And he said out loud that before they went to Chelsea, he had something to sort out, and then the tiger decided for himself that he should reincarnate as a human. Meanwhile, the old man was walking with 2 children. Chelsea asked how far they still had to go, and then began to worry that her husband could not catch up with her. Turning around, the man said that the village was already behind the mountain, and said that they would wait for the tiger there. Suddenly Ben told Chelsea that the tiger could not be her husband. Then the girl, screaming and pulling the boy's hair, asked what he was talking about, and then said that if she said that the tiger was her husband, then he was her husband. Then she let the boy go and said that if he pointed it out to her again, he wouldn't show it enough, to which the boy replied, holding his head and crouching down to the ground, that he understood everything. Suddenly a man in a hat turned to the old man and asked who it was. The man in the hat asked the old man, while his carriage was riding nearby, if he was Joshua from Congar. In response the old man asked if this was Harvard. And then, folding his hands in a welcoming gesture, the man said that he was expressing respect to the senior student, to which he replied that there was no need for such formalities. Harvard said it had been 10 years since he left Congar. The old man replied with a smile on his face that people from there will forever remain family. The man suggested to the old man and the children that if they were heading in the same direction, they should go together, to which Joshua happily agreed. Meanwhile, something was happening on Wulong Mountain while the sky was overcast. One boar, spraying saliva, shouted that their leader must make a decision, because there were more and more people. Another boar shouted that since there are more people, then more animals become food for them. And then they all shouted together, looking at the leader, who had a tree growing on his back, that this was the business of their family. And then they asked that if their leader was gone, who would take care of Mount Yudin. The boar chief thought about how he wanted to leave this place in peace, but there was no one who could protect these helpless ones, and it would be too selfish to abandon them like this. Suddenly a raven flew up to the leader and whispered something in his ear. Then someone said for the boars to disperse, and the red paw stepped onto the land of the boars. The tiger came closer and closer to the leader until he opened his eyes. Spencer noted out loud that this was their first meeting in 30 years. The leader of the boars said that he hardly came to get even for the past, and asked what suddenly happened to the guardian of the mountain. Thinking about how petty this boar was, the tiger asked why he suddenly began to feel nostalgic, and then said that he had come to find a flower of flame. The boar's thoughts latched on to the phrase flame flower, and he asked himself why the keeper needed this valuable medicinal herb. The chief said that he had this flower, and the tiger thought that he doubted that he had it, but still he had it. Then the boar said that the tiger must do him a favor, and if he refuses, he will not take even a pebble from this mountain. Spencer asked about the service. The leader said that if the tiger was the one who defeated that bloodthirsty rat, then it would not be difficult for him. The beast reluctantly agreed and asked what he wanted to ask for. Squinting slyly, the boar said that it was not difficult at all, and then added that he just needed to follow his son and help him. Some time later, many wild boars began to descend from the mountain. The tiger was walking somewhere with them. Hannah noted that there were a lot of wild boars here, and then asked if they had accidentally fooled the tiger. Spencer replied that nothing could be done, he couldn't fight all these pigs alone, and the main thing was that he got this flower. And then he added that they would see what would happen, and if something unexpected happened, they would run away. The son of the boar chief turned to the crowd and said that they had arrived, and then added that there would be a signal soon and ordered them to wait. Spencer remembered that his son's name was Walter, and then asked his son if it was time for him to tell him what all this was about. Walter told them not to worry as he would be with them, but then added to let them know that they were putting their lives on the line. Suddenly a raven flew in from above, and the tiger and boar quickly looked up. The chief's son noticed their target appear on the horizon, and they quietly peered out to watch the approaching carriage. The tiger noticed that these were human carts, and doubts crept into his head. Taking a closer look, Spencer noticed that these carts were guarded by toists, that is, warriors with spiritual powers. Noticing this, he asked Walter if they really wanted to rob the things that the toists guard, and then said that boars are not only rumored to be fools. Walter responded that that's why he said they were putting their lives on the line, and then he said that their goal is an enlargement ball that the toists carry in their carts. Spencer was very surprised to hear that they wanted to steal the enlargement ball, because this is a potion that can be used to increase the territory. This is what many people dream of. The stunned tiger said that they had all gone crazy. Suddenly he said that he was leaving, to which the chief's son replied that they had already made a deal, in response to which the tiger asked about which prudent person would bet his life on this. Walter said that it was too late to wash his hands of this, and that there was no way out of this. The chief of the boars, meanwhile, stood on the top of the mountain. Suddenly he assumed that the operation had already begun, and then he thought that this matter would determine whether they could cope with the consequences. And then he suggested that, regardless of whether they would take this ball or not, it was unlikely that people would sit idly by, rather, they would go and attack them in response. I thought that these little people would come not only for them, but also for their territory, and their clan would be defeated and disappear. Suddenly Walter shouted that everything would have been like this if Spencer hadn't come. In response to this, all the other boars began to praise the tiger, shouting that they were fighting for Spencer. Many boars began running up the mountainside to meet the crew. The toists noticed the approach of a pack of wild boars and shouted that the creatures were attacking them, and that it was time for everyone else to prepare for the attack. Meanwhile, the tiger was still standing on the dais while one of the toists shouted for everyone else to protect the carts. Suddenly this same toist noticed a tiger standing on a hill and said that it was Spencer, the guardian of the mountain, and suggested that he was the head of these boars. And then the same man shouted that they needed to kill him. In response the tiger shouted, having figured out the plan of the leader of the boars, that he was a bastard old man. Meanwhile, the leader, rejoicing and mocking Spencer, said that now all the enemies would be aimed at him, and that he should try to evade their attacks, and then laughed loudly. Meanwhile, the toists fought fiercely with the boars, cutting their bodies with swords. The already out-of-breath warrior noticed that there was no end to these boars, while a pile of boar corpses lay next to him. A whole mountain had already formed from the corpses of the boars killed by the toists, but the boars still did not stop their advance. Hannah noticed that the boar chief had set them up, and then asked Spencer what they would do, and then suggested that they could immediately go back to the mountain. The tiger irritably replied that this is exactly what their opponents are trying to achieve, and he cannot afford to give what they want. And then, preparing to enter into battle, he told the ghost that now their opponents were toists, and therefore he should be more careful. Covering herself with her invisibility cloak, Hannah replied that she understood. Meanwhile, a gentleman sitting in one of the carts noticed that the wars outside still could not calm down. As it turned out, it was Harvard, who said that he would go there alone, and then ordered Joshua to stay inside with his students. Meanwhile, Ben and Chelsea were sitting at the table eating, and an old man was sitting next to them. As soon as one of the toists noticed that his master had left, he told him that he could rest, because they could handle it themselves, in response to which Harvard only tooted disdainfully. While the toists were still chopping the boars into pieces, the man asked what was going on here, and then he took out a small bell from his sleeve, and then he began, raising his hand with this bell up, to ring it, and suddenly a huge force wave came from the master, which began to push the boars away. As the boars flew back, Spencer, recognizing the sound, remembered something. Noticing this technique, the tiger realized that this gentleman was the leader of these toists. Suddenly Harvard noticed something from below and looked there, saying that there was a big animal in them. The man turned to Spencer, causing him to cower in fear. Taking out a talisman from his sleeve, the gentleman with an ominous smile on his face said that this tiger would make a good skin, and then he used the talisman, and some things that looked like tree branches flew out of it. Fortunately, Spencer managed to dodge this attack, and the branch did not hit him. The man, frowning, thought with surprise that this dirty animal was still able to evade. Looking at the branch next to him, the tiger thought that if this thing had hit him, he would have already died. The beast noted that this is, without a doubt and exaggeration, a powerful spiritual force and who would be hit hard. Looking at the master, who pulled out even more talismans from his sleeve, the tiger concluded that he was a very skilled fighter. Making a gesture with his hand, the man said that the beast would definitely not be able to evade this, and his eyes turned orange. Using the power of a 1,000-strike technique, the man used the talismans, which now stood in a semicircle above him, and branches appeared from them, which were now heading towards the tiger at great speed. The tiger did not expect such an attack at all. Due to the fact that he did not expect this, he was unable to dodge this attack, and several branches overtook him, but could not pierce him as the tiger deftly ran away from them. The man laughed evilly, saying that if the tiger became even for a second, his life would end. Continuing to mock the tiger, the master noticed something was wrong. As it turned out, Spencer was quite successful at dodging these branches, which in turn hit either the boars or the ground. Harvard frowned even more, calling the tiger a sneaky cat. Suddenly he shouted that he didn't care about his skin. Now he would turn him into minced meat, and then his eyes became bright yellow, and the bell glowed even brighter. Suddenly, branches began to emerge from the ground around the tiger, bending towards him at the ends. Soon these branches began to come closer together and become entangled, forming a cocoon around the beast. But Spencer did not despair and used his furious claw technique, and his paw glowed with blue fire. By using this technique, the tiger was able to burn its wooden cocoon with its blue fire. Suddenly, at the same time, all the toists and all the boars stared at this bright blue flash. Meanwhile, the tiger began to approach them, its eyes glowing with an angry red light, and sticks sticking out of its back. Harvard thought in bewilderment about how this beast could survive his strongest attack, and then he thought about how an animal could have such incredible strength. Spencer thought about how much he didn't want to use this technique, and then asked Hannah if she had found what they needed. A second later, the ghost appeared next to the tiger, saying that she had found everything, and then she worriedly asked about when he managed to get hurt so badly, and if everything was okay with him. Spencer replied that he was dying. Meanwhile, the man shouted that the tiger's strength was running out, which meant that now he was definitely at the very bottom, and then he laughed evilly. The woman said that they had already got what they wanted, and offered to leave here, and then covered the tiger with her invisibility cloak. The gentleman was surprised to notice that this power of invisibility, and then, looking at where the woman and the tiger had stood just a second ago, he shouted and asked where she had gone. One of the toists, running up to the master, said that they had a problem, while he angrily stared at the now empty place. The Taoist said that their ball was missing, and now Harvard returned the glance, and turned to the man in irritation and surprise. He wanted to ask what he was talking about, but could not finish, as he began to choke on his own blood. The man's disciple worriedly asked if he was okay, to which he extended his hand, trying to stop the Taoist, and said that there was no need to worry about him, while he himself crouched closer to the ground and spat out blood, and then added that he just weakened. Spitting blood, the gentleman thought that if he lost the ball the night before, he would be kicked out of the community. Suddenly he remembered Hannah, who used the power of invisibility before his eyes. Starting to rise from the ground, Harvard ordered everyone to start looking for the thief who stole their ball, to which the student replied that there were only 3 of them left, and they would not be able to cope with Spencer. In response, the man shouted angrily that they had seen how the tiger weakened after his attack, because he barely survived it, and then said that while he was recovering, 1 Taoist should stay with him, and the other 2 should go after the beast. And then he ordered them not to lose sight of him, and at the same time the door of the carriage was opened by a small handle. Chelsea looked out of the carriage with concern and asked if they were really talking about her husband. Meanwhile, Spencer and Hannah reached the flower field, and the tiger said that the Taoists must be in a commotion there now. And then he said that he would like to see the expression on Harvard's face, and after he thought about it, he said that even his soul felt good, and he began to laugh. The ghost shouted, saying that now was not the time for laughter, and the tiger needed to think about himself. The woman noticed that the beast was getting worse and worse, and wondered what had happened there. Suddenly Spencer fell to the ground and the woman called his name in concern. Having fallen to the ground, the tiger suddenly began to vomit blood. Noticing this, Hannah said that this would not work, and she needed to get these sticks out of the tiger's body, to which he, grunting a little, told her to do it. Suddenly Spencer's scream shook the entire forest. Having taken one of the sticks out of the tiger's back, the woman noticed something bad about it, and meanwhile the tiger muttered angrily that he should have been warned before taking out this stick. Then the ghost said that these sticks had taken root in the body of the beast, and her hand shook slightly with fear. Sweating and steaming from his mouth, the tiger told the woman to continue. The ghost tried to object, saying that he was already bleeding heavily, to which Spencer replied that if he waited any longer, these branches would suck all the blood out of him, and if she got them, it would be better than that slow and painful death. However, these arguments did not seem too convincing to Hannah, and she again came across an objection, to which the tiger said that she knew that he could handle it. And then again, but more insistently, he ordered her to pull out these branches. After hesitating a little, the woman nevertheless took hold of one of the sticks and, saying that it would be very painful, began to remove them from the body of the beast. Meanwhile, the Taoists were following Spencer and Hannah. Suddenly one of the Taoists sank to the ground and said that they had found this tiger. The other noticed that this tiger was very badly injured, and then the same Taoist told another to be careful, even though this tiger was seriously wounded. In response, the first Taoist said that he knew what the strength of the owner of the mountain was, so he was sure that he was now dying. The first Taoist, rising from the ground, said that the ghost next to the tiger had invaluable power, and if they took this power away from her and returned the ball, they would receive a promotion. Meanwhile, Hannah removed all the sticks from Spencer's body, and then she thought that even though she had gotten all the sticks, the tiger had lost consciousness, because he had lost a lot of blood, and then she decided that she still needed to wake up the animal. Suddenly, a voice sounded from behind the ghost and asked who it was, to which the woman immediately turned around. Two Taoists finally got to the tiger, and one of them said that although the tiger was breathing, he was sure that these were his last breaths, and Hannah, screaming, asked how they found it. And then she took out a sword from her necklace. Attacking the ghost, the Taoist defiantly asked if she really wanted to protect her master. Shouting that this was all very funny, the Taoists attacked Hannah, and their swords pointed straight at her. Meanwhile, Harvard was in some dark space and meditating while some blue vapors were emanating from him. Exhaling blue smoke, the man thought that he had restored his strength to the 3rd level, and then he decided that this was enough to return to battle. The Taoist, who had been ordered to stay close to the master, was now guarding the crew, and he complained that they were not even attacked by people, but by some animals, and then remarked that this was not even funny. Suddenly something passed the carriage window, and some bright flash came out of it. As it turned out, it was Harvard, who thought that even though he had not yet fully recovered his strength, he would have assistance next to him, and then, heading straight to the tiger, he remembered the stone on the ghost's neck, and suggested that he would rather just priceless. And then, with a greedy smile on his face, he suggested that there were many other valuables in this stone. Anticipating what would happen next, Harvard thought that if he thought of a strong tiger and a ghost who controlled that stone, then he would be the richest man. Some time later, the man finally noticed the body of a tiger lying in a flower field. The man noticed with delight that his prey lay right before his eyes. Meanwhile, in the carriage where Joshua, Ben and Chelsea were sitting, some kind of commotion began, and the boy told the teacher that the girl had disappeared. In response, the man asked again, and the boy replied that she said that she would go and pee in the bushes, but then he did not see. Going out into the street, the old man cursed quietly and exclaimed that it was very dangerous in the mountains. Meanwhile, Chelsea was walking uphill somewhere through the forest. Sweating a little from getting up, she thought that she was sure that those people were talking about her husband, and although she doesn't know why they fought, she knows for sure that her husband came for her. So the girl decided that now she would go to him. It was already getting dark, and Spencer was still lying in the flower field, and the flowers were in his blood, and Harvard came closer to the tiger's body. Grinning, the man suggested that the animal died while pulling out its branches, and then thought that it was obvious and complained about how boring it was. Looking to the side, the Taoist said that since the tiger died, that means the ghost has evaporated, which means her little thing is somewhere here and we need to find it. Having examined the area near the tiger's body, the man was surprised to note that the necklace he was looking for was nowhere to be found. Starting to shake with anger, Harvard assumed that one of his students had already taken this necklace. The man swore loudly and, in a fit of anger, with the help of a talisman, struck the tiger on the neck. From this blow, Spencer's head flew away from his body and rolled on the ground. The man thought furiously how this scum dared to steal his thing, and then, assuming that this Taoist could not run far, Harvard, with a bright flash, went to look for him. Some time later, someone walked up to the tiger's head. As it turned out, it was Chelsea who took Spencer's head in her hands, and then she smiled faintly and turned to her husband. Relating the head to the body, she asked if he had decided to play a trick on her again. The girl said that she would not allow herself to be deceived anymore. Having attached the head to the body, Chelsea sat down next to him and told the tiger to stop mocking him and get up quickly. But then the head fell away from the body again, and she rolled across the flower field. The girl stared at the head in surprise, and then she took her in her hands again saying that she asked to stop these jokes. Chelsea reattached her head to her body and said that Spencer did a good job and therefore should get up. But the beast did not get up, and its head fell off again. Then the girl burst into tears, and then she completely burst into loud sobs near the lifeless body of the tiger. Meanwhile, Hannah carried Spencer on her shoulder, saying how heavy he was. Suddenly she dropped it to the ground. From this blow the tiger suddenly opened his eyes. Rising sharply, the beast wondered when he had time to pass out, and the ghost was glad that he finally woke up. Suddenly Spencer noticed something strange in the form of a woman. As it turned out, Hannah was slowly evaporating. A few hours earlier, she had fought 2 toists. Swinging swords flickered in the air with a bright flash. One of the toists was amazed at the strength of this ghost and replied, "At this rate they will lose." Suddenly an idea came to his mind, and then he pulled out 2 knives from his sleeve, and, saying that if the tiger dies, the ghost will also die, the man threw these 2 knives at the body of the tiger. And now there was a second left, and these knives would plunge into Spencer's head, killing him. But suddenly Hannah runs up and protects the beast with her body, and the knives end up in her back. The Taoist who launched the knives notes that sacrificing herself to save her master is the only way for her to survive. Suddenly the ghost says that she has been messing around with them for too long, and yells to finish it all. Turning to Spencer, she says that he will be in a little pain now, and then a huge amount of purple smoke begins to escape from Hannah. One of the Taoists looks at this in bewilderment. The other, angry, asks if she really decided to use illusions, and then says that she is no match for him, and attacks her with a sword. The first Taoist tries to stop his comrade, when suddenly the ghost's eyes light up with a bright flash. Everything around was engulfed in violet light, which began to destroy the Taoist's body. His comrade extended his hand towards him, and the corners of his eyes turned red. When his comrade disappeared, the Taoist who remained alive fell to the ground and screamed in frustration. His hands were shaking and stained with the blood of his comrade. At the same time Hannah came closer. She said that, of course, she had exhausted her strength, but not to the point of losing to scammers like them. With tears in his eyes, the man looked at the ghost and thought that she was invincible. And then he begged her not to kill him, because he was simply following orders. The woman asked the Taoist that after all that he had done, he was now asking for mercy. Hitting his forehead, the man bowed down in front of Hannah and said that he would do whatever she asked if she would spare him. In response to this, the ghost asked if the man had a talent for magic. Upon hearing this, the man opened his eyes wide, and then he answered, raising his head, with a bloody mark visible on his forehead, that he had the ability to do magic, and he would do anything. Then the woman took out the eye that remained after the victory over the black soul, and a spell appeared from it, and told the Taoist to look at this spell and immediately get to work as quickly as possible, and she would supply him with the necessary raw materials. And then she, looking sternly at the man, added that what he did, he himself would eat, and therefore he needed to be very careful. Hearing about what happened before he awakened, Spencer said that what she gave him to eat was what turned the Taoist into a copy of the tiger. And then, looking at the ground, he sadly noted that the ghost had to suffer a lot because of him. Reaching out her hand to the beast, Hannah said that when the tiger passed out, she gave him that ball, and it seemed like that ball was really effective since Spencer was able to survive with such injuries. Suddenly she fastened her necklace around the beast's neck, saying that all that was left for the tiger to do was absorb all the beneficial properties of the ball. While the ghost was still slowly evaporating, she said that this was the last thing she could help Spencer with, and then added that she had a lot of fun. The tiger noticed that Hannah just needed to rest a little, and then asked why she was talking like she was saying goodbye to him. Leaning his forehead against the tiger's nose, the ghost said that he was afraid to leave him alone. Suddenly she began to evaporate even more actively, saying that while she was gone, he should be careful, but she did not have time, and this phrase was cut off halfway. Before she could finish speaking, Hannah disappeared, leaving Spencer alone sitting on the ground. A little later, the tiger quietly said that the ghost would return quickly and that he would wait for her. Meanwhile, the leader of the boars was told how their recent operation went, which clearly did not please him. His subordinates huddled a little to the ground, afraid to utter a word. The evil leader thought that Spencer, despite the chaos, was able to take and escape with the magic ball, and then he noted that he had underestimated him, and then thought that as soon as the tiger healed his wounds and regained his strength, he would come for him head. And then he furiously shouted to his subjects to quickly go look for him, because they could not let their sacrifices be in vain, and then added that Spencer was seriously wounded, and therefore could not run far. And then, still shouting, he ordered that the wild boars must find him and kill him, because if this is not done, he will tear off their heads. Spencer, meanwhile, was climbing his mountain. He soon reached the pond where he was with Chelsea and called Anthony. Then the head of a catfish appeared from the water and asked if Spencer had come to him. And then, seeing that the tiger was covered in blood, he loudly asked in surprise what had happened to him. The beast replied that he did not have time and would explain later, and then said that they needed to leave here. Anthony replied that since Spencer said so, he would follow his orders, and then he irritably asked if this meant that that bastard Dustin would also go with them. Suddenly a root began to burst out of the ground, and a surprised exclamation was heard from somewhere. As it turned out, this root turned out to be a talking one, and apparently it was the same Dustin, who later said that this catfish 100% wanted to leave him, and then added that it was better for them not to take such heartless people with them. Spencer sighed heavily, and closed his eyes as Anthony and Dustin bickered and insulted each other. Meanwhile, the panther, resting in Spencer's cave, woke up and stretched. Suddenly he heard something and moved his ear, and then he stood up sharply with shining eyes, declaring that Spencer had returned. And then, saying that he was sure it was his scent, the panther ran away to the exit of the cave. Quickly approaching the exit of the cave, he laughed, and then said that this impudent man had finally shown up. And then he added that he would finally break it today. But then he noticed something was wrong, and he braked sharply. As it turned out, Spencer had indeed returned to his cave, and noticing the panther, looked at him questioningly. The panther stood and looked at the tiger, stunned, and then, still stunned, he called the tiger by name, and then he screamed and asked what creature dared to touch Spencer. In response, the tiger quietly calmly asked what difference it made to the panther who wounded him. Hearing this, the panther fell silent in surprise, his eyes bulging, and then, scratching himself on the head, he began to mumble some answer, making it up as he went. And when he finally came up with it, he said that because of this, he now could not fight the tiger in a fair fight. In response to this, the tiger said that only the panther and this fight were missing for him now, in response to which the panther asked where he was going. Spencer replied that he was a little busy right now and asked the panther to come later, and then he would play with him. The panther opened his eyes in surprise and asked when he should come, because he had already been waiting for this meeting for a long time. The tiger replied that if he had waited so long, then let him rejoice, because soon he will be able to fight, because soon those with whom he can do this will come here. In response to this, the panther asked who would come, to which the tiger said that maybe it will be toists, or maybe those pigs from Wulong Mountain. Then the interlocutor asked in surprise that Spencer fought with the toists, and his partner only looked at the tiger in surprise. Hearing this, the woman said that it was amazing to be alive after the battle with the toists. Leaving the couple, Spencer said that he had a lot to do, and therefore the panther had to find how to entertain himself. The panther was about to call Spencer, when suddenly his partner pushed him in the face with her thigh, and then the woman turned to the tiger, asking if he could listen to her, and then said that he was being pursued by his enemies, and besides, he had a lot of wounds, and he was alone. Not understanding what the woman was getting at, Spencer asked, so what if he was alone and injured? Then the woman invited the tiger to unite with her owner, that is, the panther. Then both animals asked again. The woman said that her owner wanted to test his strength with him, but of course, after he healed his wounds. The tiger thought that there was no guarantee that he would get to his hiding place before the toists or the pigs found him, and this proposal could not have been more timely. The woman asked what Spencer thought about the proposal. Tiger thought it was a good offer, but then refused out loud, saying that he couldn't trust them, and then he added that he did not want to continue on his way, fearing that someone would hit him in the back. In response to this, the panther got angry, saying that he was not so mean, while the woman put her hand in front of him. Then she suddenly began to take something out of her sleeve, asking if Spencer was familiar with this thing. Next, the woman had a small sign in her hand, and when she saw it, the tiger exclaimed in surprise. The panther asked what this thing was, to which his escort asked him to keep quiet. Spencer thought that this was a sign that directly connected the life of the person whose name was written there, and out loud he asked about that, and what she was going to do next. Then the woman suddenly bit her finger, and then she wrote something on the tablet with her blood and said that she would write her name, and the name of her owner there. Suddenly the panther felt that something was happening to his body, and then, while the beast was still perplexed, the woman handed this sign to Spencer. Spencer's eyes widened in surprise, and he thought that since the woman wrote her name there, she must have gone crazy. Noticing that the tiger was not doing anything, she asked what he was thinking about and told the tiger that he understood that if he had this sign, they would not be able to harm him. In response to this, Spencer said that the fact that she wrote their names on it meant that she was putting their lives in his hands, and then asked where she got such courage from, because she knows what he can do with this sign. Then the panther intervened in the conversation, saying that Spencer was not so cowardly as to threaten them with this sign, to which his escort agreed with a smile. Turning away from the couple, Spencer said that he did not need such a thing, because it would only burden him, and then began to walk away from them. The woman and her owner stood still, and then the panther hesitantly called the tiger by name. Suddenly the tiger turned around and asked why they were still standing, because they had a long journey ahead of them. Hearing this, the panther joyfully turned to his companion, and then he ran up to the tiger with the words that since the tiger was not able to cope alone, he would help him, and then they all set off together. Some time later, the company decided to make a halt. Lying on the ground, Spencer thought that they had been walking without rest for several days, and the woman did not look tired at all. And then he noted that this woman was higher level than he thought. Then Spencer called Hillary by name, and she answered. He then asked if she could teach him how to hide his spiritual power. Hillary noted that it was not difficult for her to teach the tiger to do this, and then asked what he would give her in return. Hearing this, the tiger asked what she wanted. Stroking her master behind the ear, the woman replied that she didn't even know, and then said that she noticed that Spencer already guessed a lot about her, and it was difficult to lure her with anything. And then, pulling the panther by the cheek, he said that its owner, who was sleeping peacefully like a baby, was very easy to lure. Hearing this, Spencer realized that Hillary had chosen to accompany her master all her life, although it was unclear why she had chosen such a fool. And suddenly she asked if the tiger had a Dabongwan ball, which surprised the tiger. Looking at the woman, he wondered how she could find out about this. Could she really know what was inside? Suddenly, seeing the tiger's reaction, Hillary, clapping her hands, said that she had been sitting and guessing all this time. But it seemed she had guessed right, and then she explained that she had lived a long life, and therefore she had a highly developed sense of smell for such things. Replying that he understood, Spencer thought that he felt sorry for giving away the ball just for this. Then the woman took out a book from her sleeve and said that if the tiger gave her this ball, then in return he would receive a sacred book in which very powerful forces were hidden. And then, to the tiger's surprise, she said that this book was very difficult to master, but if he succeeded, he could easily raise his level to Shinsu. And then he thought that people like him only have 6 levels of power, and all magical creatures like him dream of rising to the level of Shinsu. Then Spencer thought that no matter how hard you try to raise your level, this is not given to everyone, because it is very difficult to get at least 1 level. But if he has this book, then he will be able to become many times stronger without raising his level. Hillary said, looking at the book, that it showed traces of the previous owner, and he was clearly at the highest level. The tiger swallowed when he heard that the owner of this book could not fully master it. The tiger asked whether the woman was really satisfied with this exchange, since she was losing a lot by giving this book to him. Hillary replied that everything was fine, but in addition she would like to ask Spencer to be more friendly with her master. The tiger was surprised by this request to be friendlier with the panther, because it meant that he needed to help him, because they were on the same level, but still agreed. Suddenly, someone's voices were heard in the forest, and Spencer noticed that it seemed that the pigs were already close. Turning around, the woman said that since they had discussed everything, then let the tiger go forward. Spencer asked if the woman could handle it. In response, Hillary said that the tiger had big plans, since he was going to that place, and then added that she trusted him with the owner. Spencer replied that he understood, mentally noting how much Hillary cared for the panther. The tiger then began to wake up the panther, tugging at his ear with his paw. Reluctantly, the panther woke up, saying that he had such a good dream. Then Spencer said that it was time for them to go, in response to which the panther asked if it was really time. Noticing that the tiger had already begun to leave, he shouted to wait for him, and then turned to Hillary and called her. The woman said that she would soon catch up with them, but for now he must go forward, otherwise he would lose sight of Spencer. Hearing this, the panther quickly ran after the tiger and shouted to the woman to quickly catch up. A little later, when the animals were already out of sight, wild boars began to appear from the forest. Meanwhile, the tiger and the panther were already walking across the field, and the panther asked if what he had just eaten was a debongwan ball, and then asked the tiger why he gave him such a thing, to which Spencer replied that in exchange for this ball I gave something to Hillary. As the animals approached the tree, the panther became indignant, asking if this was the whole reason. Looking around, the panther asked if they had come there at all. There was nothing here, while Spencer came closer and closer to the tree. Then he touched this tree with his paw, and then he released his spiritual powers straight into the tree. A second later, leaves began to appear on the bare branches of the tree. A little later the tree was completely overgrown with leaves, and the panther joyfully asked if this was really a magic tree. Suddenly the ground beneath him began to shake, and soon a staircase down appeared in front of the panther. The tiger said that he accidentally discovered this place, and if he entered there, he would be able to fully master the power of the ball and no one could stop him. Having finished speaking, Spencer began to go downstairs. Going down, the tiger thought that after he raised his level, no one would dare to encroach on his life, and no one else would get hurt because of him. When the sun was already shining brightly, Hillary reached the same tree. The boars screamed furiously, asking how long they had to wait, since they had already waited for 3 days. Turning around, the woman asked what they would do here. In response to this, the boars said that the woman should show how to open this place, and they themselves would go there. When suddenly the ground under their feet began to shake, and then an explosion ripped through the place next to the tree. A little later it became possible to notice the silhouette of a man in the smoke. Hillary and the boars looked at this silhouette in surprise, and then the boars began to shout that this man smelled like Spencer, and if they caught him, they would be able to find out where he was. Suddenly the man said that these boars are stupid, and then he announced that he was Spencer. Hearing this, the boars began to furiously ask how this was possible, and how he turned into a human. Suddenly, a second later, the previously clear figure of a man became blurry, and the man plunged his sword into the body of one and the boars. All the other boars looked back at this scene in surprise, exclaiming in surprise. Spencer thought that his physical abilities had also improved. Suddenly, the sword located in the boar's body began to suck the blood from this body. The man was surprised by this outcome and pulled out a sword, engulfed in a red glow, from the already almost dry body of the boar. Noticing this, the boars exclaimed in surprise that this was a sword sucking the blood of the victim. Picking up the sword, Spencer asked him how he liked the taste of blood, and then he thought that this sword really looked scary, but it also had its advantages. The boars began to wonder if this Spencer had really increased his level, and what should they do now. Suddenly one of the boars exclaimed furiously that they should not be afraid, because they had once defeated a creature much stronger than him. The rest of the boars turned to the speaker, who continued, saying that, besides, he was alone, which meant he was outnumbered by them. This speech inspired the wild boars, and they attacked the man. Spencer said how obvious it was and that this was exactly what he was waiting for. And then he raised his sword again, and then he hit the ground with a sharp movement, and a dark whirlwind of fog appeared around him. This whirlwind then began to spread, to the surprise of the pigs. One of them tried to cheer them up again as a dark fog filled the entire area. Soon this fog spread so that the boars could no longer see each other, and were suffocating in it. Then one of them shouted to follow his voice, but no one responded. Suddenly the cry of pigs was heard ahead, and suddenly his brother appeared in front of the boar, blood flowing from his eyes, and he himself asked for help. Suddenly, a bunch of dark hands appeared from the fog and reached out to the unfortunate man, and then they gave him a rare tug and pulled him somewhere deeper, until another boar screamed in panic and ran after him. He then looked up in shock, where there were many red eyes staring at him. A second later, the same hands grabbed this boar, and then all that dark fog began to be sucked into Spencer's sword. A little later, there was nothing left around. There were no boars, no bones. Spencer wondered if the sword was so thirsty for blood that it left no one alive, and then he noted that if he had been distracted for a second, he could have become a victim himself. And then he indignantly asked what kind of sword this was, and quietly mumbled that he should throw it away. Suddenly Hillary noted that this was extremely impressive, to which the man turned around. Putting the sword back into the necklace, he agreed with the woman's words. The woman congratulated Spencer on his increased power level, and then she asked how he managed to turn into a human, to which the former tiger replied that it was a long story. Hearing this, Hillary asked if it was all because of his fiancée. Shaking his head, Spencer replied that it was not like that at all, and irritably wondered what this woman was even talking about. And then he said that he would go to Mount Yudong, and asked if the woman would go with him. Closing her eyes, Hillary replied that her master, like a turtle, was late everywhere, so she could not give an answer. And then she said that her master, as soon as he woke up, would immediately go look for Spencer, and therefore she handed him a bracelet in the shape of a snake. Scratching his cheek, Spencer noticed with bewilderment that this was a love bracelet worn only by couples in love. And then the man wanted to refuse, but suddenly one of the bracelets jumped from the woman's hand and flew straight at the man, and it immediately wrapped itself around his wrist. After that, Hillary said that she would give the other half to her owner, in response to which Spencer only made a displeased face and chuckled. And then the woman said that the former tiger was unlikely to be reincarnated anytime soon, and then asked if he could lend her one thing for reincarnation. Spencer looked at Hillary in surprise and said that he didn't think a woman would need a transformation ball. In response, the woman objected, saying that she would need this ball. Without resisting for a long time, the man finally gave her the transformation ball, and Hillary thanked him in response. After that, Spencer said that he would then move on and that it was unknown when they would meet again, so let her take care of herself. And then he began to go into the distance, while the woman stood in this vacant lot, following him with her gaze. And then Hillary told herself that she also doesn't know when, but they will definitely meet again. And then she, saying that she couldn't wait for this, began to approach the tree. Some time later, somewhere in the mountains in the forest, night had already fallen. In this forest, a red-haired guy stood inside, and then he asked why he had to be so stressed about him, while the elderly servant stood behind him. Then the guy turned around and asked if Spencer really lived here. The elderly servant replied that this tiger definitely lives here, and every resident of the nearest village knows this place. Suddenly, someone approached the red-haired guy from behind, saying that Spencer was not in the cave, and therefore it seemed that he had guessed about their arrival and ran away. The dark-haired guy said that it seemed that the tiger thought that if he ran away, he would not be found, and then, putting the tiger's hair in some object, he said that if he put the tiger's hair in this compass, he could find him wherever he is. And then the guy added that this compass has a disadvantage, which is that if you use this compass, then you cannot use it for another 2 days. Then suddenly a ray of light burst out of this compass and began to point in a certain direction. The dark-haired guy noticed that this was the southeast direction, and the journey would take 3 days. The red-haired guy said that then they should hurry up to quickly get rid of this tiger and return. And then he loudly commanded the other toists to go to the southeast direction. The next day, someone shouted at the girl about how dare she snatch the shamrock from his territory, to which the girl replied that she did not know and apologized, but that someone continued and shouted that this shamrock belonged to him, and she may not even dream of picking up even one leaf. Then the girl, shaking with fear with tears in her eyes, said that if she did not bring the shamrock, then her chickens would starve, and if they starved, they would not lay eggs. Then the interlocutor, hearing this, shouted how dare she argue with him, causing the girl to close her eyes. This someone said that in the end people raise chickens just to eat them, which is why they really are very disgusting. As it turned out, this formidable defender of his territory turned out to be a hare, who, stamping his foot, said that while he, Spencer, was still alive, no one could take anything from this clearing. Looking at the hare uncertainly, the girl asked if she could still take some shamrock. Then the hare, hearing this, jumped sharply, raising his paws, and shouted that how dare she dare him, and asked that she really wanted to test the sharpness of his claws on herself. Opening one eye slightly, the girl thought about what she had heard that Spencer was a huge, menacing tiger, but later the rumors were false. Seeing the claws on the hare's paw, the girl closed her eyes again, thinking that these claws probably cut both the air and everything around her. Seeing that he was able to intimidate the girl, Spencer grinned proudly. Suddenly someone grabbed the hare by the ears and asked what kind of pseudo-Spencer this was. As it turned out, it was the real Spencer, and meanwhile the hare began to flounder in his hands and furiously scream and threaten. Then the girl told the man that he shouldn't do that, because this is Spencer, the owner of the mountain." Spencer, still shouting, declared that he was the owner of this entire territory, and asked how this insignificant person dared to hold his ears. Not at all frightened by these threats, the real Spencer leaned over the hare and asked if everything was really like that. And then he suddenly looked menacingly at the hare and tiger stripes appeared on his face. Seeing this, the hare became very frightened and began to beg for mercy. Having achieved the result, Spencer told the girl that she was taking the basket and everything in it with her, in response to which the girl asked if she really could do this. Then the man approached the girl and, handing her basket, said that the owner of Mount Spencer was not so petty as to be angry over such nonsense. Having thanked her, the girl ran away with the basket in her hands back to the village. The man followed her with his gaze with a smile on his face, when suddenly the hare, who had already woken up, suddenly raised his voice. Holding the hare higher, Spencer said that he needed to talk to him about something, and then he added that he hoped that Pseudo-Spencer's ears were attached not only for decoration. Spencer then asked if anyone was in his cave. The hare immediately responded, continuing to shout that 3 days ago some toists came, looked for something, and then went in a southeast direction. Scratching his chin, the man thought that 3 days ago he had just reached the tree, and it was located in the southeast direction, which means they had definitely come for him. And then he thought that now wherever he goes, these toists will follow him, so he needs to go to Mount Wudong and lose everyone's throats there. But then Spencer noted that first you need to find out the level of toists, and how many there are, and until then you cannot act rashly. The man was thinking that he needed to find out what strength consisted of, but then a great idea came to his mind, and he laughed quietly. Then Spencer suddenly called the hare, to which he immediately responded, and then the man said threateningly that if he did as he told him, then he would let him go. And then the hare went into the forest to tell all the animals that the toists had caught Spencer and were going to Mount Wudong. The raven also heard this gossip. Hearing this, he immediately took off and flew. Some time later, this raven flew to Mount Wudong and told the chief of the boars about this gossip. Hearing this, the rest of the translation boars began to ask how it turned out that Spencer was caught by the toists, and they are now coming here and why they didn't kill him. Suddenly the leader said that, apparently, the tiger did not want to die alone. Then one of the boars asked the leader what they should do in this case. The leader said that this tiger cub must have said that he hid the Dabongwan ball here. Then the boars, hearing this assumption, again shouted at the interruption that he had really lied to the toists, and that they could defeat the servants. But there were definitely no toists. Suddenly one of the boars shouted that they needed to run away from here, causing the leader's eyes to darken. Suddenly he stamped his hoof, splitting the stone he was standing on. Frightened by this, the boars suddenly fell silent and bowed their heads. Then the leader of the boars, letting out steam from his mouth from anger, shouted that this place was from Rodan, and asked where they would run away, leaving this place. And then he said that the local land was ideal for them and that they would use the area and take out the enemies in numbers. And then he shouted even more furiously that they would slaughter all the people and get the Dabongwan ball, and then ordered to call everyone. Meanwhile, the red-haired Taoist, who was chasing Spencer, was thinking angrily that they had lost the trail. Had he really grown wings? And then he asked his dark-haired friend what the current location of this tiger was, to which the guy replied that Spencer was not moving now and was standing in one place. And then he said that the compass points to Mount Yudin. Then the red-haired guy rushed even faster in this direction, saying that they would soon get there, and he would personally rip the skin off this tiger cub. Meanwhile, the other Taoists could barely keep up with the two men. Meanwhile, Spencer was indeed on Mount Yudin, standing on the mountain. He told himself that he had prepared everything, and now all that was left was to wait for everyone else to come. And then he declared that he would return everything that the leader of the boars had done to him in full. Some time later, the Taoists and servants finally stopped, completely tired. The red-haired guy thought that they barely made it to this mountain, and then wondered how they could now look for this tiger on such a large mountain. But then he remembered that Spencer had been seriously injured by the Taoists, so if they separated, they would be able to find him. Suddenly he noticed that someone was walking in the forest far away, and he immediately called this guy, who turned out to be Spencer, who in response only pointed a finger at himself in bewilderment. Calling the man to their place, the Taoists said that they were looking for a huge tiger that devours people, and therefore they came to catch it, and then they asked if he had seen it. Striking his fist in the palm of his hand, Spencer, pretending to be a fool, replied that he had just doubted and did not believe his eyes when he saw its size. But now he was sure that he had seen a large tiger. While one of the minions sighed with relief, the dark-haired Taoist asked where the guy saw him. Spencer responded by saying that it was hard for him to explain, so he better take them there. Then all the Taoists followed the unfamiliar guy. Spencer, leading the people along, said that even in a dense forest, animals make a path, and large and formidable animals often walk along this path. Looking behind him, he added that if they followed this road, they would come out to the place where he had seen the tiger. Turning around, Spencer, looking at the Taoists, noted that there were only 2 Taoists and 6 minions. And then, with a smile on his face, he thought that even if these Taoists were strong, there would still be more boars in numbers, so it should be an interesting show. Spencer then asked if they knew anything about Mount Widom, to which the dark-haired Taoist replied that they didn't know much. Hearing this, the man said that wherever they go, there is always a story that has taken root in a certain area, and then said that it is not for nothing that this mountain is called the Mountain of Dominance, because all creatures from humans to animals have gathered here who love to dominate everything. Touching the tree, Spencer said there was talk that the mountain was now dominated by wild boars, and then, raising his hand with a piece of wool, he said that vessels of wild boars in the form of their wool were left everywhere. The red-haired Taoist, looking at his comrade, asked if he thought it was funny that pigs were dominant. In response, believe me, he said that he had heard that their people had recently been attacked by wild boars, and then suggested that maybe this tiger had lured them out of there on purpose. Sighing, the red-haired man replied that there was nothing wrong with that, because their opponents were just animals. Then the dark-haired Taoist told the guy to listen to his surroundings, and noticed that not only animals, not even insects could be heard here. Hearing this, the minions began to look around a little excitedly. Suddenly one of them noticed something. Suddenly, wild boars started running out from behind the bushes at the people. One of the minions shouted to the others to shorten themselves while one of the boars tried to knock them down with its body. But this boar only dined past the men and ran further into the bushes. The servant was surprised that the boar only dined by, when suddenly another shouted that there was danger behind. The first servant did not immediately understand what the other one meant, and meanwhile a huge boar was approaching him. And a second later, this boar lifted that servant on its tusks into the air, piercing him right through. The servant who managed to notice this boar called his already dead comrade and rushed at the boar, while he also rushed at the man. While the screams of minions and the angry grunting of pigs were heard around, the red-haired Taoist stood and simply watched. Suddenly his hand was engulfed in flames, and he said that since they were able to think of attacking from the back, then they are very smart for pigs. And then, when the fire engulfed his entire body, the guy said that then he must answer them properly, and then said that he would burn them all to ashes. Meanwhile, one minion was fighting a boar, trying to defend himself from his ex with a sword. Suddenly this boar noticed a light on the side, and suddenly a red-haired Taoist appeared from the side and threw his flame at the boar, hitting it, causing it to fly to the side. The servant thanked the red-haired Taoist, calling him Alex. Alex looked at the servant and told him to finally pull himself together, otherwise, if he was distracted, these boars would kill him. While the Taoists and minions fought the boars, other boars watched from behind the bushes. Suddenly one of the boars returned, and the other noticed him and noted that he was still alive. And then he said that these little people immediately began to use their abilities, everything as the leader predicted. Afterwards he quietly said that he would try to change his location, but then Spencer, who appeared out of nowhere, said that this would not work, because they should all cut each other's throats. Frightened by this sudden appearance, the wild boars instantly ran out from behind the bushes, exclaiming in surprise and fear. And then suddenly these boars were torn into pieces by water bubbles. As it turned out, these bubbles belonged to the black-haired Taoist. Then he turned around and said that these pigs were not as stupid as she thought, but it seemed that they had already killed everyone. Then one of the minions, turning to the Taoist, calling him Kyle, said that they had lost sight of that guy, meaning Spencer, to which Kyle replied that it seemed that the boars had taken him, and then he told the men to forget about him, and it would be better to kill the pigs. At the same time, the still hiding boars were shaking with fear, and one of them wondered why the boars kept coming out to them if he ordered them not to do so after the first attack. Meanwhile, Spencer was approaching them from behind, smiling evilly. Suddenly he screamed, and the boars screamed in fear, and then, like the previous two, They also ran out from behind the bushes. Seeing this, the guy laughed, covering his mouth with his hand. And then he thought that it is still difficult for animals to suppress their instincts. And then he thought angrily that these pigs would continue to kill each other until they were all dead. Meanwhile, another of the boars was also wondering what his comrades were doing and why they were not following the plan. Suddenly the leader's eyes shone with an unkind light. Suddenly he stepped forward, saying that he himself would sort everything out. As he ran forward, he thought about why these stupid nobodies couldn't just follow the plan. He thought about why they overstepped his words and that he knew they were stupid, but not that much. And then the chief of the boars finally took to the battlefield. With his eyes bulging and puffing with anger, he wondered what was going on there, since there were only 10 left. Suddenly, one servant noticed the leader and decided to attract the attention of Taoist Kyle to him. Looking at this boar, the guy immediately realized that by appearance and behavior this was their leader. Suddenly one of the boars asked the leader if he needed to call everyone, in response to which the leader angrily asked if he had really decided to act. Sitting on a rock and watching the scene, Spencer said that, as expected, the chief of the boars began to flutter when almost all of his subordinates folded their hooves. But even those who survived looked tired. And then, looking condescendingly, he asked what the result of this battle would be. Then the leader of the boars furiously shouted to his subordinates to attack the people with all their might. And then, running out with them, he said that he, the leader of Mount Wulong, would fight with them. Alex, noticing the leader, said if their boss had really come out, and then noted that his size was very impressive. Starting to get excited, he noticed that with his current attacks he would not even scratch him, and therefore decided to do something. And suddenly his whole body was on fire, burning his clothes, and he himself shouted that he would reveal his full potential. And then he shouted that he would end this battle. Stretching his arms forward, Alex launched a fiery phoenix at the boar leader, which rushed straight at the boar. The leader thought that the Taoist was underestimating him if he wanted to defeat him with such strength, and then he stamped his hoof, and his eyes glowed yellow, and he thought that he would take the life of the Taoist in return for those that he had taken. And suddenly the phoenix flying at the boar was torn apart, and it did not hit the leader at all. Alex opened his mouth in surprise as he watched this. Without hesitating for a second, the leader pounced on the guy until he could only raise his hands in fear, and then the boar hit the guy with an attack, and everything around was eclipsed by a bright flash of light. As it turned out, Kyle managed to get in front of his partner and defend him, irritably asking how Alex could waste all his powers without thinking, while Alex noted that this boar had been hiding his powers until that moment. As it turned out, Kyle super injured the leader and broke off his tusk, and the boar only thought that this Taoist was able to repel the blow into which he put all his strength. In front of the guys there was a huge crater, and the leader stood nearby, and the servants wondered if the Taoists were okay. Looking at the Taoists, the leader thought that everything was a little more complicated than he thought, and wondered what he should do now. Adjusting the guards on his arms, Kyle told Alex to regain his strength while he finished what he started. Suddenly Spencer came onto the battlefield, skiing loudly and saying that it was also not interesting to fight. Everyone present looked at the guy in surprise. Suddenly Spencer took off from his seat as he approached, and he found himself right behind the backs of the Taoists and the leader of the boars. Saying that you shouldn't interfere in other people's fights, the guy waved Kyle's severed hand with the thing that protected Alex, saying that it was cheating, and therefore he would take the thing. Suddenly, Kyle felt severe pain and blood began to spray from the wound. Noticing this, he began to scream loudly. Taking out the thing that protected the Taoists from the attack of the boar leader, Spencer smiled sarcastically, and saying that this thing was very useful, threw out his now useless hand. While the Taoist was writhing in pain, Alex angrily asked how he dared to injure one of their people, and then he shouted that the guy could no longer hope that he would be left alive after this. Meanwhile, the chief of the boars asked, after a short silence, if this guy was Spencer. Taking the sword out of his necklace, the former tiger replied that the boar had a good sense of smell, and then said that he had to return the favor, and therefore how could he entrust it to someone so inexperienced? The servants, raising their swords, shouted that this guy would not get away with it just like that. The boars, meanwhile, cried out questioningly, asking if it was Spencer. With 2 fingers crossed, Spencer said that everyone was already in the know, and then, snapping his fingers, he said that now we can finish this. Suddenly blue circles appeared under one of the boars. Those same circles also appeared under one of the minions, Suddenly, the man's entire body was engulfed in blue fire, which burned him, leaving only ashes. As it turned out, this fire consumed everyone who was in this place, except for the toists, one of whom was still sitting on the ground, clutching his wound. Alex, seeing all this, was surprised by this power, and suddenly he realized that these were the powers of Shinsu. The leader of the boars also did not find himself engulfed in this fire, and therefore watched in panic as his subjects died. Alex thought that such power of this level had not existed for a long time and had disappeared before his birth. And then, looking at the guy in surprise, he wondered how this guy could use this power. Meanwhile, Spencer looked at him with his red eyes, and the whites of his eyes turned black, and the red-haired Taoist thought that he needed to inform everyone about this terrifying power. Out of fear and stuttering, Alex quietly muttered that he needed to be informed about this power, and could not take his eyes off the guy. Suddenly Spencer began to approach the Taoists. When the guys were engulfed in fire, and it would seem that he did not make a single movement with the sword. The guys clung to each other, continuing to slowly burn out, and Spencer moved on. He approached the chief of the boars. Closing his eyes, the chief said that he realized that, as it turned out, they had fallen into Spencer's trap. And then he noticed that the power that came from him meant that the guy had raised his level, and after that he congratulated him on this. Spencer, looking sternly at the boar, asked if he had anything final to say. Looking down, the leader noted that there was no point in telling anyone anything, and then said that he had a request. But he did not have time to say what exactly the request was, because Spencer cut off his head with his sword, causing a surprised expression to freeze on the face of the boar leader. Sighing, the man irritably asked if this pig had really tried to ask him for something. And then, like everyone else, the boar was consumed by fire. Some time later, Spencer reached a village that was close to his mountain. The man noted to himself that after that battle he received, albeit of a low level, 1 ball and 2 necklaces. He also received 3 useful spells and 2 useful books. Taking one look at it and smiling hungrily, Spencer noted that it was a good catch. And then, remembering his sword, he sensed that if he had used its power, it would have destroyed absolutely everything. Sighing and putting the items he had received into Hannah's necklace, he thought that this power was too powerful, and that was its problem. And then he remembered that he had also found 2 letters. Looking at them, he thought that something important was probably written at the bottom. He was sure of this, but he could not check, because he did not know the letters. Suddenly the same girl who was collecting shamrocks called out to him, and Spencer turned his head, looking at her. The girl said, holding a book in her hands, that thanks to the man, her chickens eat well, grow very large and lay very large eggs, which she sells, and with the money she buys reading lessons. Still holding the letters in his hands, Spencer asked again. In response the girl asked if he really needed someone who could read, and then she snatched the letters from the man's hands. Puffing with impatience, the girl opened one of the letters and said that she would read everything here now. And then she began to read, and the content of the letter turned out to be this: our battle with magical animals does not end, becoming more and more, and the place by the Red Sea can turn into a battlefield against magical creatures. Spencer was surprised by the word war. Noticing that the man's expression had changed, the girl asked him what happened, to which Spencer replied that nothing had happened and told the girl to continue reading. The girl continued, the government's actions are very alarming, so all Taoists be prepared. And then the girl said that that was all she could read, in response to which the man replied that that was enough for him and thanked the girl. Patting the girl on the head, he asked if she wanted anything as a thank you for reading, to which she replied, chuckling, that she didn't need anything. And then she added that he saved her, and therefore she didn't need anything. Suddenly, looking at this girl and her smile, he immediately remembered Chelsea, and then, saying that even if so, he still wanted to thank her, and then handed her a bag with some things. Looking into the bag, the girl noticed with delight how shiny these things were. Spencer told the girl not to show them to anyone, to quickly run home to hide them and open them only with her mother. Listening to Big Brother, the girl ran home. Having walked away a little, she turned around and shouted that if he still needed to read something, he could always find her. Spencer saw the girl off with a smile on his face, and then he sighed heavily and raised his head, looking at the sky, still thinking about the contents of the letter. Night had already fallen, and Spencer was walking somewhere in the forest and thinking that the Red Sea was the region to the west of here, and if a war broke out, it would quickly reach his village. Suddenly he touched the stone with his palm, and then he moved his hand down, and some signs began to appear on the stone, and shine with a blue light. A second later, part of the stone separated and began to move away. As it turned out, there was a hidden door in this stone, which was now wide open, and behind this door there was a staircase that led down. The man stepped out the door and began to go down the stairs, thinking that if a big war broke out between humans and magical creatures, then all the evil souls would cause chaos in this mortal world. A little while later, the man arrived at some place and walked in a straight line. There was some kind of blue light shining ahead, and Spencer walked boldly towards it. As he came closer, he thought that in case of war, everyone in this world would need strength. And then a huge blue bird appeared in front of Spencer. The man wondered out loud if anyone thought that on his mountain there was something that they thought had disappeared centuries ago. Continuing to come closer, he noticed that before he could not simply come here. But now everything has changed. Suddenly some blue mist separated from the bird, and taking the form of a bird, it screamed furiously. Having come almost close, Spencer declared that he was now ready to absorb the power of the Shinsu entirely. Suddenly, the blue mist bird began to concentrate energy in its beak, as if preparing to attack, and then she fired a huge beam of energy directly at the man, causing him to make no attempt to dodge. This blow took a toll on Spencer. His clothes were covered with holes, and he himself almost fell to the ground, but was still able to hold on. Grinding his teeth under the strain, he thought about how even though he had increased the level of his powers, he was still barely hanging on, and then wondered if his body could handle all that force. Meanwhile, the bird flapped its wings and waves of blue fog began to flow across the ground. This fog began to slowly surround the man, and then Spencer found himself in the epicenter of a blue tornado, which lifted him above the ground. This tornado of power continued to tear the man's clothes and tousle his hair, but he did not give up, but only tensed even more and shouted loudly that he must endure. He then extended his hand forward in an attempt to fight out of this tornado, shouting that the fact that he would gain this power would only be the beginning, and if he did not do this, he would not be able to go out into the world. Continuing to reach towards the center of this force, he shouted that then he would rather die here than screw up. Spencer's eyes turned completely red and he almost completely grabbed the center of that power, screaming at her to make it his forever. Suddenly he squeezed the center, and the bird screamed pitifully, and Spencer continued to drink above the ground, no longer surrounded by the tornado. To be able to hold this center of power, he supported his hand with his second hand. Suddenly Spencer became a little confused, not understanding what was happening, and asked if he really succeeded. But then suddenly he again felt strong pressure and pain. Now this force entered Spencer's body and seemingly began to tear him apart from the inside, unwilling to submit, causing blue flashes to sometimes burst out of his body. Gritting his teeth, the man asked the force if it still didn't want to obey him and was resisting. But then he realized that this was the power of Shinsu from ancient times, and therefore he only clenched his hands into fists. And then, pressing his hand to his heart, he began to try to tame this force. The tiger stripes appeared on the man's face again, and with a smile on his face he said that the path the force would try to overcome him, he would still help her adapt to his body. Some time later, Spencer was still in meditation, but it seemed that the power was no longer kicking around in his body, although his clothes were almost completely torn, but the flow of power was calm and even. The man noted out loud that 4 years had already passed, and during this time thousands of changes had already taken place inside his body. Suddenly he sank to the ground and said that now he could still achieve absolute perfection. Having said that he was finally able to comply with this blue flame, Spencer held the blue flame in his hands, which swirled in soft waves in his palm. By conjuring his clothes and putting himself in a decent appearance, he noted that he had reached a new level. Lowering his hands, the man found himself in complete silence, and then sighed. Folding his arms across his chest, he noted that there was so much he had to do and wondered what he should sit in first. Suddenly he remembered about that girl from the village and decided to meet her. Some time later, Spencer reached his village, where life was in full swing. The man stopped and asked the woman about this girl. In response, the woman asked, "He wants to know about Eve." Suddenly the men standing nearby said that if he wanted to find out about this girl, then her family was sent into slavery. Spencer asked why this happened. One of the men said that this family suddenly had a lot of money, and after that they sent their daughter to school, But the nobles could not come to terms with the fact that a commoner was studying with their children, and therefore began to complain about Eva's family. The man continued, saying that in the end, the nobles said that this family stole this money, and this girl was left as a slave in one of the houses, and then added that this girl must be beautiful, since they want to make her a concubine from a slave. Another man, laughing, said that the last time he saw her, she had a straight, sharp nose and pale skin, and then exclaimed, saying that who knew that she would become so beautiful. One of the men said that it looked like this family had a good eye, when suddenly Spencer approached the men, and then, with a threatening face, he asked where this very house was, while his eyes glowed red. A few hours later, night had already fallen, and in one of the estates they were already getting ready to go to bed. Meanwhile, in one of the rooms, a woman, saying that everyone thinks differently, tricked a ball of fabric into blush. The woman applied rouge to the cheeks of the young girl, saying that she needed to accept it. There was nothing wrong with it, and then added that this was the house of the richest man in the village. Combing the girl's long hair with a comb, the woman asked if she knew how many girls envied her, and then encouraged the girl to think positively. Having finished with the preparations, the woman left the girl alone, and she stared at the floor with glassy eyes. Some time later, the girl went outside and stood under the light of the moon. Suddenly someone said that they had finally found a girl. Recognizing this voice, the girl, who turned out to be the same Eva, asked if it was he whom she thought about. Spencer noticed that she still remembered him. The girl, who had already become a girl, replied that of course she remembered, because he helped her 4 years ago, and then said that the man had not changed at all during this time. Coming closer, the man said that he had come today to learn writing. Looking at the guy in surprise, the girl asked again, her eyes wide open, and then she smiled brightly and closed her eyes, saying that of course she would help, but she didn't have much time. Spencer and Eve found a place to study and sat down on the rocks, and the girl began to explain something to the guy, pointing to something in the book. The girl said that if he wrote like that, the meaning of the sentence would change. While she was telling all this, her eyes were shining with happiness. Suddenly the girl stopped explaining and fell silent, drooping a little. The man, noticing the change in the girl's behavior, looked at her questioningly. Closing the book that was lying on her lap, Eve said that it was time for them to finish their lesson. Standing up, the girl with her eyes closed said that she was glad that Spencer was able to master today. Squeezing her skirt in her hands, the girl continued, saying that she suddenly remembered how she was discriminated against for being a girl and studying, but she did not give up and continued, and then said that, probably, thanks to the man, she was brave. Looking at the girl, Spencer asked about courage. Looking at the guy with a twinkle and hope in her eyes, Eva asked if the man could fulfill her wish, since she taught him how to write. Some time later, a drunken gentleman returned to his estate. With a sharp movement, he opened the doors to the room where the girl was already sitting. Laughing obscenely, the nobleman asked how long the girl had been waiting for him, and then said that he drank to cheer him up. Coming closer to the girl, the man extended his hands to her, and noticed that she was even more beautiful in this dress. Almost touching her, he said that today they would go to heaven, and she just needed to obey him. And so the man put his hands on his belt, unfastening it. Suddenly Eva hit him in the face, shouting that he should not touch her, causing splashes of blood to fly. The man looked in surprise at his cheek, which now had a cut on it. Pointing the knife at the nobleman, the girl shouted that she did not want to drink in such a house with such a person, and she would rather die than do this, and he would die with her. Then, shouting that Eva was a scoundrel, the man also hit the girl on the head with a jug of wine, breaking it. From this blow, the girl fell on the bed, and the gentleman shouted how dare she cut him when he was pampering her with compliments. And then the nobleman continued to beat the girl until she could not sit and only clenched her teeth. Some time later, Eve sat against the wall, covered in blood stains and bruises, practically unconscious, while the master stood over her, breathing heavily. The man noted that the girl was stubborn, because she didn't make a sound, and then, having said that he was not against this look, he looked lewdly at the girl, while drool flowed from his mouth. Suddenly someone grabbed him by the collar with 2 fingers, and then Spencer, on foot, threw the man to the other end of the room with a movement of his hand. The girl did not react to this in any way, but only sighed heavily. The guy said that he was worried about her because she asked him to find silver, and then sent him here. Hearing this, the girl opened her eyes. And then Spencer went on to say that Eve was even more unpredictable than he expected. Suddenly the nobleman, shouting, asked, rising to his feet, why everyone was not giving him peace today. And then, turning to the guy, he asked about who is he anyway? Hearing this, Spencer turned to look at the master with a threatening look, and then he said that so be it. Spencer remembered Chelsea crying and screaming that she couldn't leave her husband, and then the guy began to come closer to the man, while he, crawling on the floor, tried to move away from him and begged for mercy. A blue mist suddenly began to escape from Spencer, and the man asked him again who he was. Suddenly he screamed shrilly, sticking his clawed hand forward. The guy replied that he was Spencer, whom he was so eager to kill, and then a huge blue tornado appeared over the entire estate of this gentleman. Some time later, a man and a girl were walking up the mountain. Eve, still a little in shock, looked at Spencer's back, and then she noticed to herself that this brother turned out to be the owner of the mountain. Turning around, the guy said that he heard what happened to her, and then asked if she despised him, because it all happened because of the jewelry that he gave her. The girl looked at the man, her eyes wide, and then, looking away and smiling weakly, she replied that she could not hate the one who helped her, and besides, she was very inspired by the fact that she would finally be able to fulfill all her dreams. Feeling a little sad, the girl continued, saying that back then she didn't yet know how cunning and greedy people could be. And then, bursting into tears, Eva said that she only wanted to do what she liked, so why didn't life allow her to do this? Spencer looked at her sympathetically as she said that she couldn't help it, and didn't know where to go next. Suddenly he struck the ground with the scabbard of his sword, and then he told the girl to pick up this sword, and then it would become her path and show her the way. Afterwards the man added that Eva would become his follower, learn to use this sword and defend the mountain. To which the girl responded in surprise that she was a girl and had never even held a sword in her hands. In response, Spencer told the girl to discard all these prejudices about the female gender, because her confidence was enough when she taught her to learn, and her courage when she wanted to live the life she chose. After these words, the man concluded by saying that Eve is strong. Hearing this, the girl stared at him in surprise, and then she extended her hand to the sword, and then she nevertheless picked up this sword, mentally noting that it was heavy and that she was scared, but she would try. She said out loud that she would try to walk confidently along the path that Spencer had laid out for her, and then, with a smile on her face, looking at the man, she said that she would protect his mountain until he returned. In response, the man said that the girl was doing well and she should continue to live. 3 months later, Spencer stood at the entrance to the town of Eton. Looking at all these buildings, the man thought that this city was big. And then he thought that everyone said that the mountain on which the city stood was high. But now his mountain seemed so small compared to this. Then he remembered that this gate was built a long time ago, and behind it is the Savile treasure, which doubles everything you put inside, and many people desire this treasure. The man noted that he managed to get to these gates in the guise of a man, and then he wondered how he could get inside now. Suddenly an old man, followed by a whole crowd of men, called out to him and asked if the guy was a wanderer. Looking at the questioner, Spencer replied that it was so. The old man replied that they were just missing one thing, and then he told the guy to go with them, because what was the point of just standing around doing nothing? Then 2 men approached the guy and pulled him with them, persuading him to join. While the company was climbing the mountain, the old man said that today is the day when Mount Yen opens once every 100 years. One of the men said that this was a special day for them, because if they were lucky, they would be able to go inside. Another man, turning to Spencer, sarcastically remarked that if you stand at the entrance, then you are no better than a stone at the door, while another also sarcastically asked whether the guy really thought that if he stood there, the doors would be opened for him. And then he said that the guy seemed smart, but he didn't know anything, while Spencer looked at them with a straight face. Suddenly another man complained that they were helping this land, so why should they enter through the back entrance, and not the main one? Looking at the man with his sharp eyes, the guy wondered if these fools knew what would happen to them if they entered, and even if they succeeded, they only killed weaklings. And then what? But after that he thought that he didn't care about it. The main thing was that the doors opened, and in the meantime the company got to the doors. The old man pulled out some kind of piece of wood, and extended his hand to the door. Suddenly a ray of light burst out of this piece of wood, and went straight to the lock on the door. And then the doors suddenly opened. Suddenly a man came out from behind the door, and called the old man, saying that he was late. The old man began to make excuses, saying that they were missing one person, and they were late while looking for him. Suddenly the man turned around and, saying that it didn't matter, ordered them to follow him. Meanwhile, a bunch of people had gathered behind these doors, and someone, standing on a raised platform, announced the names of the detachments into which the people were divided. One of the men of the newly arrived company asked if these were all servants, to which the old man replied that the toists were ahead. Suddenly the conductor pointed his finger at the men and loudly asked why they were still standing, and then ordered them to take their places. Passing by members of other squads, Spencer concluded that he was in the 5th squad. Suddenly, a man standing on a dais loudly said that today, after 100 years, the doors of the mountain are finally opening, and then greeted everyone. Wishing everyone success, he folded his hands and said that they would now begin teleportation. Suddenly he shouted to someone to open the gate, and suddenly the ground on which the troops stood was illuminated by a red light. Meanwhile, the red demon was devouring the meat of a huge snake. Suddenly he was distracted from eating, feeling something, and then the demon turned around, his green eyes sparkling, and was glad that the people had finally arrived. Suddenly he spread his arms to the sides and shouted a greeting loudly, and then laughed madly. Meanwhile, people had already successfully teleported, and questions were immediately heard in the crowd about where they were and whether they were already inside the mountain. Suddenly one of the men noticed something and tried to attract attention with a shaking voice. Suddenly, a huge magical wolf appeared in front of the crowd, amid their surprised exclamations. Suddenly one of the men, taking out a sword, asked how they should fight such a huge monster from the very beginning. Suddenly a man shouted that they were all fools if they could not distinguish a sacred animal from an ordinary beast, and then he added to the laughter of other participants, that this is why they do not rise in rank. Suddenly a man with a beard noticed in a little surprise that this was the guardian of Mount Yen. Then another man with a tattoo on his forehead replied that it was so, and this wolf protects this mountain, and he had also reached a high level in strength, to which the man with a beard replied that then it would be boring to greet him personally, and his friend noted that other animals would not dare compete with the sacred animal. Then the man with the tattoo on his forehead replied that that is why he is the one they are proud of. And then the squad leaders began to gather their people, preparing to enter the mountain. Suddenly the sacred beast, sensing something, turned around sharply. As it turned out, something in the crowd of people caught his attention. Suddenly Spencer felt the beast's gaze on him. In a panic, the man thought, has this wolf really revealed that he is not a human? Then this is very bad. While the beast kept looking at the guy, he thought that if the fact that he was not a human was revealed, then all the toists would pounce on him to kill him. But suddenly, to the surprise of the former tiger, the sacred beast only smiled, closing his eyes. Noticing this, Spencer thought with relief that it seemed that he was not going to be exposed. Suddenly one of his squad comrades touched the guy's shoulder and asked why he was still standing, because it was time for them to leave. Meanwhile, all the troops were leaving the cave in an even formation. Some time later someone asked if it was true that he was inside this mountain years ago, to which the interlocutor replied that it was true and that then he saw many medicinal herbs that he could not tear out. Then the woman replied that if this was true, then they would share, and then asked if they were going the right way, because it seemed to her that they were treading on the same place. In response, the old man, the leader of Spencer's detachment, replied that the woman should trust him, because it was not in his advantage to deceive them. Suddenly one of the girls, who was watching the woman, shouted that if the old man had thought of something, then he could not avoid death. Suddenly, in the next second, something carried this girl away, leaving only splashes of blood. Hearing strange sounds, the woman and her subordinates turned around sharply. As it turned out, the red demon grabbed the girl, dragging her along the ground by the head, while she, stretching out her hand to her comrades, asked for help. Noticing the red demon, the woman wondered where this evil spirit came from here. The evil spirit meanwhile licked his sharp teeth with his long tongue. At the same time, another squad was running through the forest. Suddenly one of the men told the squad leader that everyone else was left behind, to which he replied that he didn't care, because they didn't come here to study botany. In response, the man said that then, if they were left, they could be killed, to which the squad leader replied that no one cared about their miserable lives. Offering to say that they were attacked by monsters, the commander ordered to stop, and both men quickly sank to the ground. The leader of the detachment looked around, holding a red bubble in his hands, in which there was a paper crane. Suddenly he ran somewhere. Seeing this, the man called his senior fellow practitioner, and in the meantime, other members of the squad reached them. Suddenly the leader shouted that he had found something, holding in his hands a skull on which was a small egg surrounded by something golden. Then his younger classmate asked what it was and whether this was what his teacher was asking the leader to do. The squad leader replied that this is a very rare and special egg, under which golden lichen always grows, and then added that the man's teacher said that he hid it here, because his time had not yet come, but now this egg is perfect. The man with this egg in his hands slyly thought that if he took it, he would rise higher in rank and become rich, and then he began to say that now they could leave, when suddenly someone ordered them to stop. Suddenly another troop appeared from the bowl of the forest, and their leader said that he smelled something when these men ran past the medicinal herbs. The men who were already there were very surprised by the appearance of another detachment. The captain of another squad with a predatory smile said that he now understood why they were so eager to get here, because she hid such a valuable thing here. The leader replied that they were the first to find this thing, and therefore it belonged to their squad. Suddenly 2 men from the enemy squad came out, preparing to fight to take away this egg. Then the man exclaimed, asking what he wanted, was it really a battle between their troops? In response, the other replied that if they liked the same thing, why don't they compete, and the winner will take the prize, in response to which the man only gritted his teeth. Meanwhile, Spencer dug up a root and held it above his head with a smile on his face, saying that this root was probably more than 50 years old, and he had the talent to dig something like that without a single scratch on it. But suddenly, coming to his senses, the guy abruptly threw the hoe to the ground, shouting what he was talking about. And then he thought that it was dangerous, because he almost got the taste and forgot why he came, and that's not what he's here for at all. Suddenly a fellow squad member called out to him, causing Spencer to run, holding the root in his hands. At the same time, the evil spirit sucked out the souls of the arriving toists and their minions, and the old man, who led those toists, fell to the ground, bowing to the spirit, and addressed him by name, calling him Sylvester. And then, slightly raising his head, he asked if the spirit was satisfied. In response, the demon, holding the golden core of one of the toists on his tongue, replied that he did not care about such toists, and he needed stronger opponents. In a panic, the old man, sweating a little, said that there were still many toists left, and then suddenly reminded him that the spirit had promised him something. In response, the evil spirit broke the golden core with 2 fingers and told the man not to worry, and then he added that he is one of the strongest spirits, and he always keeps his promises, unlike people. And then he walked past the old man, who had still disappeared to the ground, telling him to lead him, because he did not want to hesitate, since it depresses him. Having said this, the evil spirit with a bloodthirsty smile on his face declared that from this moment the real hunt begins. Meanwhile, another squad was running after someone, and one of the men shouted for his comrades not to miss this monster. The man shouted for them to corner the monster while his comrades chased after the monster, which had white long hair, long claws, and a face covered in stripes. Suddenly one man shouted that he had caught this monster, and jumping up, hit him with his weapon, causing him to spin in the air. But the monster, as it turned out, did not die, but only sharply attacked another man. Then the other man clasped his hands sharply, causing his weapon to abruptly thrust into the monster, killing it. A man watching this battle shouted for the men to be careful and not think that these monsters are weaker than them. And then he turned to the older fellow practitioner who was standing on the mountain of the corpses of these monsters, and said that they were finished. The men began to talk about how much they could sell these monsters for, because there were a whole bunch of them, when suddenly an evil spirit appeared behind them. The men quickly noticed him and immediately turned around, drawing their weapons. Looking at the newcomer, one of the men asked if this was not a man, to which the other replied that it was an evil spirit. In response, the first man asked what then this evil spirit was doing inside the mountain. The senior fellow student and part-time captain of the squad called one of his comrades, and then ordered to attack the spirit. The man then attacked the spirit, cutting it in 2. The servants, seeing this, exclaimed joyfully that this was what they expected from the Taoist. But as it turned out, the evil spirit was not killed, but turned out to be completely unharmed. He tore off the man's head with his claws, saying that he was pathetic. And then quickly approaching the captain, he noted that he was slow. Next, he pierced with his hand the Taoist who did not have time to do anything, causing him to scream dully. The hand of the spirit was sticking out of the man's body, which was holding his golden core, and the spirit noticed with disappointment that the Taoist did not have much strength, while he groaned pitifully. The evil spirit suggested that if the captain had so little strength, then the rest did not, and then said that he would turn them all into sand. The servants began to run away screaming. Laughing dully, the spirit asked where they were going. Meanwhile, another detachment followed the tracks of some animal. The girl walking behind the captain asked if her senior classmate had found anything. Turning around, the man said that he would install a Huanjin here. The girl asked in surprise, her eyes wide open. The man, taking out an object and emitting a beam of light from it, said that while he did this, the others would defend the territory. Suddenly, an already focused beam of light emerged from the object and spread in different directions. The girls, notifying others, walked around the territory, saying that a Huanjin was being installed here, and therefore the servants needed to hire their places. The captain raised his index and middle finger in concentration and told the others to be on guard. Suddenly someone shouted that someone was here. They began to emerge from the fog. Suddenly, with irritation, they recognized the man they had found. Afterwards, one of them clarified whether it was correct that this person's name was Tyler. As it turned out, the man turned to Spencer and said that they would be nearby, so he didn't have to worry, because he would be safe and could continue to go and collect medicinal herbs. And then he added, telling him not to go far. Spencer looked at the men with an emotionless face and agreed with everything they said, thinking that they thought he was a loser. The man installing the Huanjin sighed and said that he seemed to be done with everything. Putting his hand down, he said that he did not know what would happen, and therefore he had to be concentrated. Suddenly, someone asked the man why he installed the Huanjin, because there were no creatures visible here. In response, the man asked if the girl had ever heard of Yahello, and then he began to explain that this was an evil spirit from ancient times, until this spirit in the form of a small ferret met someone. Suddenly, the men who met Spencer, noticing the ferret, wondered whether such animals lived here. One man, saying that he was bored, decided to catch this animal and already began to take out his sword, when suddenly this cute-looking ferret bared his sharp fangs and made a huge hole in the man's body. Spencer, meanwhile, continued to collect herbs, when suddenly he heard something, which made him flinch. Turning around, he wondered if someone had shouted there just now. Standing up, the man asked if something had happened, and then noticed that because of the Huanjin, his sensory functions were not working well. Meanwhile, the man who installed the Huanjin told the girl that evil spirits live here and have no use for these servants. At the same time, Spencer walked in the direction the babies were screaming and he noticed something. As it turned out, all the men who were scouting the territory had already been killed, and next to them was a huge flock of these evil spirits. Suddenly the spirits raised their heads from their bodies, and having noticed a new victim, they began to squeak furiously. Suddenly these little evil spirits gathered together and, circling, created a huge hurricane. This hurricane mercilessly tore apart the bodies of the already dead men, and this hurricane reached Spencer, and all that was left of the man was blood splashes. But, as it turned out, this hurricane did not injure the guy at all, and he, in turn, cut down the animals with a straight face. Why did all these animals end up on the ground? Hearing how dangerous these spirits were, the girl asked the captain if they should then leave this place. The captain replied that if they don't take risks, they won't earn anything useful, and besides, they can only fight against these spirits with the help of Huanjin. Looking sternly, the man defiantly said that the spirits just have to come here. Meanwhile, Spencer asked what the little thing was and said that he killed them all out of fear, and then he noticed that these animals have amazing strength. Scratching his head, the guy wondered what he should do if all the minions died, and then he began to pick up the bodies of these spirits, smiling greedily. Suddenly the man noticed someone and looked at him. A black silhouette appeared in front of Spencer. A man came out of the shadows and asked in a trembling voice if he was from the Pingun squad. Meanwhile, another squad was previously busy fighting, and one of the men was holding a huge ball made of seals. Another said irritably that this was the place where the Huanjin was installed, to which the other man replied that it was probably a Taoist from Pingun. The man asked his leader what they should do now. The leader replied that they would go ahead, and then he said that some kind of minor obstacle had appeared, but nothing had changed in a global sense. The squad rushed forward, and their leader said that, if anything happens, there will be a battle of squads.